The wind carried dust and secrets through Broken Ridge in equal measure. It was the kind of town where questions got you killed faster than insults, where the marshal's office stood empty more often than not, and where the only law that mattered was the one you could enforce with your own two hands and whatever iron you carried on your hip. Elias Crowe had drifted into town 3 months prior on a dying horse, with nothing but the clothes on his back, a rifle wrapped in canvas, and eyes that had seen too much of the world's ugliness. He'd taken a job at the trading post, stocking shelves, hauling crates, keeping his head down and his mouth shut. The owner, a weathered man named Hutchins, with fingers missing from his left hand, didn't ask questions. In Broken Ridge, that made him a businessman of rare wisdom. Nobody knew Elias Crowe. Or rather, nobody knew they knew him. The man who'd ridden with the Varnes gang 8 years ago had been younger, wilder, with a laugh that came easy, and a conscience that hadn't yet been baptized in innocent blood. That man had believed in brotherhood, in shared risk and shared reward, in the romantic lie that outlaws were just free men refusing to bow to corrupt authority. That man had died in a canyon called Devil's Throat, along with 23 settlers whose only crime was being in the wrong place when the Varnes brothers decided they needed supplies and entertainment. Elias had put a bullet in his own brother-in-arms that day, a man named Dutch Keller, who'd been dragging a screaming woman toward the rocks. The shot had been clean, through the heart, and in the chaos that followed, Elias had disappeared into the desert. The gang assumed he'd been killed in the crossfire. He'd let them think it. For 8 years, he'd been a ghost. He'd worked ranches in Colorado, mines in Nevada, lumber camps in Oregon. He'd kept moving, kept quiet, kept the past locked in a box at the back of his mind where it couldn't poison his days. But the past, he was learning, had a way of tracking you down. The first whisper had come 2 weeks ago, in the saloon where he sometimes took a whiskey after long shifts. 2 drifters at the bar, faces he didn't recognize, talking loud enough to be heard over the piano. Heard the Varnes gang hit a ranch up near Copper Falls, cleaned it out, shot the rancher when he tried to fight back. The Varnes brothers? Thought they were down south. They move around, smart about it too. Hit and run, never stay long enough for the law to organize. Elias had kept his eyes on his glass, but his hand had tightened around it until his knuckles went white. How many they running with now? 8? Maybe 10. Enough to take what they want. Heard they got a new second, mean son of a bitch named Garrett Varnes. The youngest brother, supposed to be worse than the others combined. Elias had left his whiskey unfinished and walked out into the night, his mind racing. Garrett. He remembered the kid, barely 16 when Elias rode with them, already showing signs of the cruelty that ran in the family like bad water. If Garrett was leading men now, things had gotten darker. He told himself it wasn't his problem. The Varnes gang operated across 3 territories. The chances of them coming through Broken Ridge were slim. He could keep his head down, keep working, keep being nobody. That lasted until the morning Sarah Bennett stumbled into town covered in blood. It was a Wednesday, the kind of clear autumn day that made you forget how harsh the land could be. Elias had been unloading a shipment of grain sacks when he heard the screaming. The sound cut through the morning like a knife, raw, primal, the kind of sound that came from a throat that had screamed itself hoarse and was still trying. People stopped in the street, heads turning toward the north road, where a small figure was staggering toward town. Elias dropped the sack he was holding and ran. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Her dress, once blue, now mostly red, hung in tatters. Her feet were bare and bleeding, torn up from miles of running over rocky ground. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears and blood, and her eyes held an emptiness that Elias recognized immediately. He'd seen it in mirrors for 8 years. She collapsed before she reached the first building. Elias got there first, dropping to his knees beside her, his hands hovering uncertainly. Behind him, others were gathering. Hutchins, the saloon owner, a few ranch hands, the doctor's wife. "Get Dr. Morrison," Elias said quietly. Then, gentler, to the girl. "You're safe now. You're safe." Her eyes focused on him with terrible clarity. Her lips moved, forming words that barely had sound behind them. "They killed them. They killed everyone." Dr. Morrison arrived with his bag, but there was little to treat beyond dehydration and exhaustion. The blood, he determined quickly, wasn't hers. The girl, Sarah Bennett, they learned, hadn't been harmed, not physically. Mentally was another story. It took hours to piece together what had happened. The Bennett family had homesteaded a claim 15 miles north, trying to scratch out a living raising cattle and growing what they could in the stubborn soil. Yesterday morning, riders had come, 9 of them. They'd demanded food, water, horses. Thomas Bennett had complied, giving them everything they asked for. It hadn't been enough. Sarah had been in the root cellar when the shooting started. She'd heard her father's voice trying to reason with them. She'd heard her mother screaming. She'd heard her 2 brothers begging. She'd heard the laughter. When the riders left, she'd climbed out to find her entire family dead in the yard. Shot, some of them multiple times. Her father had been killed trying to shield her mother. Her brothers had been executed while trying to run. The riders had taken everything of value and burned the house. Sarah had walked through the night and half the next day to reach Broken Ridge. Marshal Hendricks, a thick-necked man who wore his badge more for show than authority, interviewed the girl with all the sensitivity of a bull in a china shop. When Elias couldn't stand it anymore, he stepped in. "Let the girl rest," he said quietly. "She's told you enough." Hendricks turned, eyeing Elias with the disdain he reserved for drifters and anyone who questioned his authority. "This is official business, Crowe. Go back to stacking your boxes. She's 8 years old, and she just watched her family get murdered. She needs rest, not interrogation. What she needs is to give me a description of these men so you can what?" Elias's voice was still quiet, but there was iron in it now. "Form a posse? Ride out into the territory with half a dozen ranch hands who've never been in a real fight? Get them all killed chasing professional killers?" Hendricks' face reddened. "You got a better idea?" Elias looked at Sarah, curled up in a chair in the doctor's office, staring at nothing. He thought about Devil's Throat. He thought about the screaming. He thought about the laughing. "Yeah," he said. "Let the girl rest. And someone send a telegram to the territorial marshal's office. This is bigger than Broken Ridge." He walked out before Hendricks could respond, his hands shaking with an anger he hadn't let himself feel in 8 years. That night, Elias sat in his small room above the trading post, cleaning his rifle by lamplight. It was a Winchester .73, well-maintained despite years of disuse. He'd fired it exactly twice in the last 8 years, both times to put down sick animals. He told himself he was just being prepared. That's all. Just in case. The knock on his door came just after midnight. He had the rifle pointed at the door before the second knock. "Who is it?" "Hutchins." Elias lowered the rifle and opened the door. His employer stood in the hallway, looking older than usual, a bottle of whiskey in his hand. "Thought you might need this," Hutchins said, holding out the bottle. Elias stepped aside, letting him in. They sat in silence for a while, passing the bottle back and forth, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. Finally, Hutchins spoke. The girl gave a better description to Dr. Morrison's wife. "Woman has a gentler touch than that fool Hendricks." Elias said nothing, just waited. 9 riders. Leader had a scar running from his jaw to his temple. Riding with him were 2 men who looked like brothers, both tall, both mean-looking. One of them had a tattoo on his neck, some kind of bird. Elias's blood went cold. He knew that tattoo. A crow. Garrett Varnes had gotten it on his 17th birthday, said it was for good luck. The girl said, Hutchins paused, taking another drink. She said the scarred one called one of the others brother, called him Garrett. There it was, confirmation. The Varnes gang, here, in his territory. She also said, Hutchins continued, watching Elias carefully, that she heard them talking about their next target, another ranch about 20 miles west, the Patterson place. Elias knew it. Decent family, 3 kids, trying to make an honest living. They'd be slaughtered, just like the Bennetts. Hendricks won't do anything, Hutchins said. He's already talking about how it's outside his jurisdiction, how he doesn't have the men, how the territorial marshal should handle it. That telegram won't get a response for days, and by then, those riders will be long gone. Why are you telling me this? Hutchins was quiet for a long moment. Then, I was a scout in the war, 19th Indiana. I've seen plenty of men with guns in my time, son. Most of them are just carrying, but some, he looked at Elias. Some are dangerous even when they're standing still. You're the second kind." Elias said nothing. "I don't know what you're running from," Hutchins continued. "Don't need to know. But I've watched you for 3 months now, and I've seen how you move, how you think. You're not just some drifter looking for work. You're someone trying real hard to be someone else. Maybe I just want to be left alone. Maybe. But that little girl doesn't have the luxury of leaving people alone. And the Patterson family won't either when those riders show up at their door." Hutchins stood, leaving the whiskey bottle on the table. At the door, he paused. "There's an old saying from the war. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. I think you're a good man, Elias Crowe. Whoever you were before, whatever you did, I think you're trying to be good now." He left, closing the door softly behind him. Elias sat alone in the lamplight, the rifle across his knees, staring at nothing. Outside, the wind carried the sound of Sarah Bennett crying in her sleep, 3 buildings down. Dawn found Elias saddling a horse he'd bought from the livery with money he'd been saving for passage further west. The animal was young, strong, with good wind and better temperament. It would need to be for what was coming. He'd packed light, bedroll, canteen, ammunition, dried meat. The rifle went in a scabbard on the saddle. His revolver, a Colt he'd kept wrapped in oilcloth for 8 years, now sat heavy on his hip. He was checking the girth strap when a voice spoke behind him. "Going somewhere?" He turned to find Marshal Hendricks watching him, thumbs hooked in his belt, badge catching the early light. "Personal business," Elias said evenly. "That's so. Funny how your personal business seems to involve weapons and a fast horse right after a massacre gets reported." "Like you said, Marshal, outside your jurisdiction." Hendricks stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I don't know what you think you're going to do, Crowe, but let me give you some advice. Those men are professionals. They kill for a living. Whatever skills you think you have, whatever you used to be, it won't be enough." Elias swung into the saddle, looking down at the marshal. "Maybe you're right, but at least I'm going to try." "You're going to get yourself killed." "Probably. What happens to that little girl if you do? You think knowing someone tried to avenge her family is going to bring them back? You think it's going to help her sleep at night?" Elias gathered the reins. "What helps her sleep at night, Marshal? Knowing the men who murdered her family are out there, still breathing, probably planning to do it again, or knowing that someone gave enough of a damn to ride after them?" He didn't wait for an answer. He spurred the horse forward, riding out of town as the sun broke over the eastern hills. Behind him, Broken Ridge grew smaller. Ahead, the territory stretched out wild and endless. And somewhere in that wilderness, the Varnes brothers were riding toward another family, another massacre, another set of ghosts. Not this time, Elias thought. Not while I'm still breathing. The Patterson Ranch sat in a shallow valley, protected from the worst of the winter winds by low hills. It was a modest operation, a main house, a barn, a few outbuildings. Smoke rose from the chimney, a sign of normal life, of people who didn't know death was riding their way. Elias had pushed hard, covering the 20 miles in just over 3 hours. His horse was lathered and breathing hard, but they'd made it. He could see the ranch from the ridgeline, could see the family going about their morning routines. A woman hanging laundry, a man working on a fence, children playing near the barn, and on the opposite ridge, barely visible in the morning haze, 9 riders sat watching. Elias's hand went to his rifle, but he knew immediately that a long-range shot was foolish. Too much distance, too much wind, too many targets. Even if he got 1 or 2, the others would scatter, or worse, charge the ranch. He needed a different approach. He guided his horse down the back of the ridge, keeping out of sight, circling toward the ranch from the south. He rode hard, time compressing around him. Every second mattered now. Every second brought those riders closer to making their move. He came into the ranch yard at a gallop, pulling up hard in front of the house. The man working on the fence, Patterson, Elias assumed, dropped his tools and reached for a rifle leaning against the fence post. "Easy," Elias called out, hands visible. "I'm not here to hurt you." "Then what are you here for?" Patterson was in his 40s, sun-weathered, with the cautious eyes of a man who'd learned not to trust strangers. "To save your life. You and your family." The woman had stopped hanging laundry, and the children had frozen mid-play, all of them watching. "The Bennett Ranch," Elias said quickly. 15 miles northeast. You know it? I know Tom Bennett. Good man. He was. He's dead now. So is his whole family, except for his youngest girl. 9 riders hit them yesterday. Killed everyone. Burned the place. Patterson's face went pale. Tom. Jesus. Mary? All of them. Who would... Patterson stopped, understanding dawning. And you think they're coming here? I don't think. I know. They're on the North Ridge right now, watching your place. Patterson's grip tightened on his rifle. Then we need to ford up. Get ready. You can't fight them. They're professionals. They'll burn you out or wait you out, and either way, your family dies. Then what do you suggest? Elias dismounted, his mind working through options, none of them good. You have a root cellar? Somewhere hidden? Under the barn, trapdoor hidden in the floor. Get your family there now. Take food, water, weapons. Stay quiet no matter what you hear. And you? I'm going to give them what they came for. Understanding clicked in Patterson's eyes. You're going to let them think they won. I'm going to make sure they get sloppy, confident, and then I'm going to kill as many as I can before they know what's happening. That's suicide. Maybe. Elias checked his rifle. But it's better than letting them slaughter your family. Now move. We don't have much time. Patterson got his family hidden in 11 minutes. His wife had argued, wanted to stay and fight, but her husband had convinced her. The children, 2 girls and a boy, ranging from 6 to 12, had been brave, asking only if they'd be safe. Elias had lied and told them yes. Now he stood alone in the ranch yard, rifle in hand, watching the North Ridge. The riders hadn't moved yet, but they would soon. They were probably discussing approach, deciding how many men to send in first, whether to negotiate or just start shooting. With the Varnes brothers, it would be shooting. Elias positioned himself behind a water trough, giving himself cover and a clear field of fire toward the main approach. His rifle was loaded, and he'd laid out extra ammunition within easy reach. His revolver was loose in its holster. His hands were steady. His breathing was calm. And somewhere deep in his chest, where he'd locked away the man he used to be, something old and violent was waking up. He didn't have to wait long. The riders came down the ridge in a loose line, walking their horses in no particular hurry. Why would they be? As far as they knew, this was just another soft target, another family that would surrender or die. Elias counted them as they came. 9, just like Sarah had said. The leader, Marcus Varnes, with his distinctive jaw-to-temple scar, rode in the center. To his right, Garrett Varnes, the crow tattoo visible even at this distance. To his left, the third brother, Cole, who'd always been the meanest of the 3. The others were hired guns, men Elias didn't recognize. Younger faces, hungry looks. Men who'd learned violence was easier than work. They were 50 yards out when Marcus raised his hand, halting the group. His eyes swept the ranch yard, taking in the stillness, the lack of movement. Patterson, he called out, his voice carrying across the distance. We know you're here. Come on out and let's talk. Silence. Marcus smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. We're not unreasonable men, Patterson. We just need some supplies, maybe a few horses. You cooperate. Nobody has to get hurt. More silence. Of course, Marcus continued, his smile widening. If you want to make this difficult, we can do that too. Ask the Bennett family how that worked out for them. Oh, wait, you can't because they're all dead. Laughter rippled through the riders. Cruel, easy laughter. Elias felt something crystallize inside him. A decision made. A line crossed. He stepped out from behind the water trough, rifle raised, and fired. The shot took Marcus Varnes in the shoulder, spinning him half off his horse. The laughter died instantly, replaced by shouts and the sound of men scrambling for weapons. Elias had already chambered another round. His second shot took one of the hired guns in the chest, punching him clean out of his saddle. Then all hell broke loose. The riders scattered, some diving off their horses, others spurring forward. Bullets kicked up dirt around Elias as he dove back behind the trough, the air suddenly full of the crack of gunfire and the smell of powder smoke. He'd gotten their attention. Now came the hard part, staying alive. Marcus Varnes clutched his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers, his face twisted with rage and shock. Who the hell is that? Garrett, already off his horse and crouched behind a wagon wheel, was emptying his revolver toward the water trough. "Don't know. Don't care. We got 1 man against 9. Flank him." But it wasn't 9 anymore. Elias had dropped 2 in the first seconds, and now he was working methodically, using the trough for cover, picking his shots carefully. A third man went down trying to rush the house, Elias's bullet catching him in the leg and sending him sprawling. "He's behind the trough," Cole Varnes shouted. "Burn him out." 2 riders broke for the barn, clearly intending to circle around, but Elias had anticipated this. He'd positioned himself with sight lines to multiple approaches. He dropped the first rider as he rounded the barn corner. The second dove through the barn door, disappearing inside. That was a problem. A man in the barn had elevation and better angles. Elias made a decision. He couldn't stay pinned behind the trough. He needed to move, to keep them off balance, to prevent them from organizing. He gathered himself, took a breath, and ran. Bullets chased him across the yard as he sprinted toward the house, zigzagging, making himself as hard a target as possible. Something tugged at his jacket, a near miss. And then he was diving through the front door, rolling to his feet, already moving to a window. Outside, the Varnes gang was regrouping. Marcus had gotten himself behind cover, his wounded shoulder not slowing him down much. Garrett was orchestrating now, using hand signals to position their remaining men. 5 left, Elias counted, plus the one in the barn. The odds were still bad, but they were better than before. "You're a dead man," Garrett's voice carried through the broken window. "Whoever you are, you're dead. You got lucky with a couple shots, but now we're going to burn that house down around you." Elias didn't waste breath responding. He was scanning angles, looking for opportunities, his mind running through scenarios. They'd try to set fire to the house, force him out. He could try to pick them off through windows, but they'd be expecting that now, would keep to cover. He needed to change the equation again. He moved to the back of the house, finding a rear door that opened onto a small kitchen garden. Beyond that was open ground leading to a creek bed that offered cover. If he could make it there, he could flank them, hit them from an unexpected angle. It was risky. The run to the creek was 30 yards of open ground, but staying in the house was death by fire. He kicked open the back door and ran. The man in the barn spotted him immediately and started shooting. Bullets kicked up dirt at Elias's heels as he sprinted, his lungs burning, legs pumping. The creek bed was 20 yards away. 15. 10. A bullet caught his hat and sent it flying. Another creased his arm, burning like a brand. Then he was diving over the edge of the creek bed, tumbling into the mud and rocks, alive. He lay there for a moment, catching his breath, assessing. The bullet graze on his arm was superficial, already clotting. His rifle was fine. He was fine. And now he was behind them. Elias moved along the creek bed, using the shallow water and rocks for cover, working his way around to the barn's blind side. The shooting had stopped, replaced by voices. The Varnes brothers arguing about what to do next. "He could be anywhere." That was Cole, always the nervous one. "He's not anywhere. He's pinned in that creek," Garrett snapped. "Marcus, you good?" "I'll live. But when we catch this bastard, I'm going to make it last." "We need to finish this," Garrett said. "Cole, take Daniels and circle around to the creek. Flush him out. The rest of us will keep the house covered in case he tries to get back inside." Elias heard footsteps moving his direction. 2 men coming to flush him out. He settled into position behind a large rock, rifle ready, and waited. They came carefully, professionally, covering each other. Daniels appeared first, moving along the creek bed's edge, eyes scanning. Cole came from the opposite direction, boxing Elias in, or so they thought. Elias let Daniels pass his position, waiting until the man's back was turned. Then he rose from the water like something primordial, swinging his rifle like a club. The stock connected with Daniel's skull with a sickening crack, and the man dropped without a sound. Cole spun, bringing his gun around, but Elias was already moving. They went down together in the mud, struggling for control. Cole was younger, stronger, but Elias had 8 years of carrying guilt and anger, and that counted for something. They rolled, each trying to get the upper hand. Cole's gun was trapped between them, useless. Elias got his hand on the man's throat, squeezing, and Cole's eyes went wide. "Remember me, Cole?" Elias hissed. "Remember Devil's Throat?" Recognition flashed in Cole's eyes, followed by disbelief, then terror. "Crowe? But you're..." Dead? I was. For 8 years I was dead. But that little girl you orphaned yesterday brought me back. Cole's struggles weakened as Elias's grip tightened. The man's face was turning purple, veins standing out on his forehead. This is for the Bennetts, Elias said quietly. And for everyone else you've killed. Cole Varnes died there in the mud, his eyes still wide with recognition. Elias released him and stood, retrieving his rifle, breathing hard. Behind him, Daniels was starting to stir. Elias checked him. The man would have a hell of a headache, but he'd live. He wasn't a Varnes. He didn't have to die. But there were still 4 men up at the ranch. 4 men who needed to answer for their crimes. Elias checked his ammunition, reloaded, and started moving. Marcus Varnes was the first to realize something had gone wrong when Daniels came stumbling back toward the ranch, clutching his bleeding head, alone. "Where's Cole?" Daniels shook his head, dazed. "Gone. He's dead. It's Crowe. It's Elias Crowe." Marcus went absolutely still. "What did you say?" "Crowe. He said his name was Crowe, said something about Devil's Throat." Garrett had gone pale. "That's impossible. Crowe died 8 years ago." "Well, he's alive now," Daniel said. "And he just killed your brother with his bare hands." The remaining men looked at each other nervously. The name Crowe clearly meant something to the Varnes brothers, and whatever it meant wasn't good. Marcus's eyes had taken on a dangerous gleam. "Elias. After all these years. I'll be damned." "We should go," one of the hired guns said. "This isn't worth—" "Shut up." Marcus's voice was quiet, deadly. "Nobody's going anywhere. Not until we settle this." He raised his voice, calling out toward the creek. "Elias! Elias Crowe! I know you can hear me!" Silence answered him. 8 years, Marcus continued. 8 years we thought you were dead. Mourned you like a brother, and here you are, alive and well, killing my actual brothers. Still nothing. "Come on out, Elias. Let's talk about this, for old time's sake." Elias's voice came from an unexpected direction, from inside the barn. "I'm done talking, Marcus. I'm done with all of it. You and Garrett are going to stand trial for what you've done, for the Bennetts and everyone else." Laughter. "Trial? Out here? There is no law out here, Elias. You know that. There's just strength and will and the willingness to take what you want. Is that what you told yourself at Devil's Throat when you were killing those settlers?" The laughter died. "That was different." "How?" "They fought back. They defended themselves from us, from me. I was part of it, Marcus. I share the guilt, but I'm trying to make it right. I've spent 8 years trying to be better than what we were. You've spent 8 years getting worse." Philosophy from the man who just killed my brother. Marcus's voice had gone cold. "You want to make things right, Elias? Start by stepping out where we can see you. Face me like a man." Elias appeared in the barn's hayloft window, rifle pointed down at the yard. "You want to face me? Fine. Let your men go. Let them ride out of here. Then it's just you, me, and Garrett. We settle this properly." Marcus considered this. Then, to everyone's surprise, he nodded. "All right, you 3, ride out." The hired guns didn't need to be told twice. They were mounted and gone in less than a minute, disappearing over the ridge. Now it was just 3 men in a ranch yard with death in the air and old betrayals hanging between them like smoke. Garrett spoke for the first time since learning who they faced. "Why, Elias? Why come after us now, after all this time?" "Because you killed a family yesterday. Because you were planning to kill another one today. Because someone has to stop you, and I'm the only one who knows what you really are." "And what are we?" "Monsters. The kind I helped create, the kind I need to put down." Marcus smiled, but there was no humor in it. "You always were self-righteous. Even back then, you thought you were better than us. That's why you ran, isn't it? Couldn't handle the blood." "I ran because I finally saw clearly, saw what we'd become. What you always were. And now you think you can take us? Even odds, Elias. Even odds." Elias chambered around. "They were never even odds, Marcus. I was always better." What happened next happened fast. Marcus and Garrett both went for their guns. Elias, with the high ground and preparation on his side, fired first. His bullet took Marcus in the chest, center mass, a kill shot. But Marcus, even dying, got his shot off. The bullet sang past Elias's head, close enough to feel the heat. Garrett was faster than his older brother, and his first shot hit Elias in the side, spinning him around. The second missed as Elias fell back into the hayloft. Pain exploded through Elias's torso, white-hot and overwhelming. He could feel blood, warm and wet, spreading across his shirt. The wound was bad, maybe fatal, but there wasn't time to think about that. Garrett was coming. Elias heard boots on the barn ladder, heard Garrett's labored breathing. He forced himself to move, dragging his body behind a hay bale, rifle clutched in shaking hands. "You're hit, Elias," Garrett called out. "Shkete, I can see the blood trail. This is over." "Not yet," Elias managed, his voice weaker than he'd like. Garrett's head appeared over the edge of the loft floor. Their eyes met. In that frozen moment, Elias saw the boy Garrett had been. 16, angry, looking for belonging. He saw the man Garrett had become. Cruel, empty, defined by violence. He saw what he himself could have been if he'd stayed. "Sorry, kid," Elias whispered. He pulled the trigger. The bullet took Garrett between the eyes. The young man's expression went slack, and he fell backward, tumbling down the ladder to land in a crumpled heap on the barn floor. Elias let the rifle slip from his hands. He could hear voices outside, Patterson and his family emerging from the root cellar. He could hear hoofbeats in the distance, probably Marshal Hendricks and a posse arriving too late as usual. He pressed his hand to the wound in his side, feeling how much blood he was losing, doing the math. It wasn't good. But Sarah Bennett would have justice. The Patterson family was safe. And the Varnes gang, what was left of it, would scatter and fall apart without the brothers to hold it together. Maybe, Elias thought, as darkness crept in at the edges of his vision, maybe that was enough. Maybe 8 years of running, of trying to be better, had led to this moment for a reason. Maybe ghosts could earn their rest after all. He closed his eyes, the pain fading to a distant thing, and waited to see if he'd wake up again. And somewhere in the darkness, he could hear voices calling his name. The darkness should have been final. Elias had made his peace with it, had felt the cold creeping into his limbs, the weight of his eyelids becoming too heavy to resist. Death had seemed like a reasonable price for what he'd accomplished. The Varnes brothers were finished, the Patterson family was safe, and maybe, just maybe, the scales had begun to balance. But consciousness returned anyway, dragging him back from whatever edge he'd been teetering on. It came in fragments, voices murmuring nearby, the smell of carbolic acid and laudanum, the sensation of clean sheets against his skin. Pain followed close behind, a deep burning in his side that flared with every breath. His eyes opened to unfamiliar ceiling boards, water-stained and warped with age. Afternoon light slanted through a window to his left, dust motes dancing in the golden rays. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as agony lanced through his torso. "Easy now." A hand pressed gently on his shoulder, easing him back down. "You've got a hole in you the size of a silver dollar. Dr. Morrison said you're lucky the bullet went clean through, but you lost enough blood to kill 2 men. Elias turned his head, the movement sending fresh waves of pain radiating outward. Hutchins sat in a chair beside the bed, looking haggard and worried. Behind him stood Patterson, hat in hands, and Dr. Morrison himself, a severe-looking man in his 60s with wire-rimmed spectacles and blood-stained sleeves rolled to his elbows. "How long?" Elias's voice came out as a rasp, his throat dry as old leather. 3 days, Hutchins said, offering him water from a tin cup. "You've been in and out, mostly out. Doctor said it was touch and go for a while there." Elias sipped the water, feeling it wash away some of the cotton in his mouth. 3 days. He'd lost 3 days to darkness while the world kept turning. "The Patterson family?" "Safe," Patterson said, stepping forward. His eyes were red-rimmed, whether from lack of sleep or emotion, Elias couldn't tell. "All of us. Because of you. My wife wants to name our next baby after you, boy or girl." Despite the pain, Elias almost smiled. "Please don't." "The Varnes brothers are dead," Hutchins continued, his tone becoming more businesslike. "Marcus and Garrett both. Cole, too, down in the creek bed. The hired guns scattered to the 4 winds. Marshal Hendricks arrived in time to collect the bodies and take credit for the whole thing, of course." "Of course," Elias managed. That sounded like Hendricks. Dr. Morrison stepped forward, his expression stern. "You shouldn't be alive, Mr. Crowe. By all medical reasoning, you should have bled out in that barn. The bullet missed your liver by less than an inch, cracked a rib, and punched through muscle tissue like paper. You're going to be weak for weeks, maybe months. And if you do anything more strenuous than walking to the privy, you'll tear those stitches and finish what Garrett Varnes started. Noted, Elias said, though he could already feel his body protesting the very idea of walking anywhere. Patterson cleared his throat. There's something else you should know. The girl, Sarah Bennett, she's been asking about you. Every day since they brought you back. Wants to know if you're going to be okay. Something in Elias's chest tightened that had nothing to do with his wound. She shouldn't worry about me. Well, she does. And frankly, so do a lot of other folks in Broken Ridge. Word's gotten around about what you did, about how you rode out alone against 9 armed men to save a family you barely knew. Some are calling you a hero. I'm not a hero. The words came out harder than Elias intended. I'm just a man who finally did what he should have done 8 years ago. Hutchins and Patterson exchanged glances. Dr. Morrison just studied Elias with those sharp eyes, seeing more than Elias was comfortable with. There's more, Hutchins said carefully. The territorial marshal finally responded to the telegram about the Bennett massacre. He's sending a deputy to investigate. Should be here within the week. Elias felt ice form in his stomach. A deputy. Name's Carson. Thomas Carson. Supposed to be thorough, smart. Doesn't let things go. Of course. Because killing the Varnes brothers hadn't been the end of anything. It had been the beginning of questions that Elias didn't want to answer. Questions about how a drifter working at a trading post had known where the gang would strike next. About how he'd been skilled enough to take down 3 of the most dangerous outlaws in the territory. About who he'd been before he drifted into Broken Ridge 3 months ago with haunted eyes and secrets. I see, Elias said quietly. Hutchins leaned forward, his voice dropping. Elias, if there's something this deputy might find, something from your past, now would be the time to tell me. I can't help you if I don't know what's coming. Elias looked at the ceiling boards again, at the water stains that looked like continents on some strange map. He thought about Devil's Throat, about the screaming, about the weight of Dutch Keller's body as Elias had dragged it into the desert and buried it in a shallow grave. About 8 years of running from a past that had finally caught up to him anyway. There's a lot coming, he said finally, more than I can explain right now. But Hutchins, if this deputy starts asking questions about my time with the Varnes gang, don't lie for me. I won't ask you to compromise yourself for my sake. The silence that followed was heavy. Patterson looked shocked. Dr. Morrison's expression didn't change at all, as if he'd already suspected something like this. Hutchins just nodded slowly, understanding settling over his features. You rode with them, Hutchins said. It wasn't a question. 8 years ago, for 6 months, until I couldn't stomach it anymore. Devil's Throat? You know about that? Everyone in the territories knows about Devil's Throat. 23 settlers massacred. Worst atrocity in 5 years. Hutchins' voice was carefully neutral. You were there? I was there. And when I saw what was happening, what we were doing, I tried to stop it, killed one of my own. Then I ran. Elias met Hutchins' eyes. I'm not proud of any of it. Not what I did with them, not what I failed to stop, not the running, but I can't change it. All I can do is try to balance the scales. By killing the Varnes brothers. By stopping them from killing anyone else. The Bennetts were my fault, in a way. I helped create the monsters who murdered them. I couldn't bring them back, but I could make damn sure there wouldn't be more families like them. Patterson spoke up, his voice rough. You saved my family, my wife, my children. Whatever you did 8 years ago, whatever you're running from, you gave us our lives. That counts for something. Does it? Elias asked. Does it balance? 3 lives saved against 23 taken? You didn't take those lives, Dr. Morrison said, speaking for the first time since revealing Elias's injuries. You tried to stop it. There's a difference. Is there? I rode with them. I helped them rob and terrorize. The blood's on my hands whether I pulled the trigger at Devil's Throat or not. Morrison removed his spectacles, cleaning them methodically on his shirt. I was a field surgeon in the war, Mr. Crowe. I've seen more death than any man should. And I've learned something about guilt and redemption in all those years of cutting into wounded boys and trying to put them back together. He replaced his spectacles, looking at Elias directly. Guilt is easy. Guilt is comfortable, in its own terrible way. It lets you feel like you're paying for your sins without actually changing anything. Redemption, real redemption, is harder. It requires you to keep living, keep trying, keep making the hard choices even when you don't think you deserve the chance. Philosophical for a doctor. War makes philosophers of us all, or corpses. Sometimes both. Morrison stood, gathering his instruments. You've been given a second chance at life, Mr. Crowe. Twice now. Once, when you walked away from the Varnes gang, and again when that bullet missed your vital organs by a hair's breadth. What you do with those chances is up to you. But I'd suggest you stop trying to die for your past and start trying to live for something better. He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Patterson followed after a few more words of gratitude, leaving Elias alone with Hutchins. The older man sat in silence for a long moment, his three-fingered hand drumming absently on the arm of his chair. Finally, he spoke. The deputy will be here in less than a week. When he comes, he's going to have questions. About you, about how you knew where the Varnes gang would strike, about your fighting skills. He's going to dig, and he's going to find things. I know. So what are you going to do, run again? Elias considered it. Running had become almost reflexive over the years, the first sign of trouble, the first hint that someone might recognize him or start asking the wrong questions. And he'd been gone like smoke. He'd left jobs, friends, even a woman he'd cared for in Colorado, all to stay ahead of his past. But something had changed in that barn. When he'd faced Marcus and Garrett, when he'd made the choice to stand and fight instead of running, something fundamental had shifted inside him. Maybe it was Morrison's words about redemption. Maybe it was the memory of Sarah Bennett's empty eyes. Maybe it was just exhaustion with his own fear. No, he said, no more running. If this Deputy Carson wants answers, I'll give them to him, all of them. And whatever happens after that, trial, prison, hanging, at least it'll be honest. Hutchins nodded slowly. That's a brave choice, stupid maybe, but brave. Bravery and stupidity have always looked pretty similar from certain angles. True enough. Hutchins stood, stretching his back with a wince. Get some rest. You're going to need your strength for what's coming. And Elias, for what it's worth, I don't regret hiring you. You've been a good man in the time I've known you. Whatever you were before, that's the man I see now. After Hutchins left, Elias lay in the quiet room, listening to the sounds of Broken Ridge filtering through the window. Voices in the street, horses moving, the distant ring of a blacksmith's hammer. Normal life, continuing oblivious to the small dramas of one wounded man trying to reconcile with his past. He thought about Carson, this deputy who was coming with his questions and his thoroughness. He thought about what would happen when the full story came out. Not just about the Varnes brothers, but about Elias's role in their crimes 8 years ago. Would the fact that he'd tried to stop the Devil's Throat massacre matter to a court? Would his actions at the Patterson Ranch buy him any mercy? Probably not. The law was the law, and he'd broken it. Accessory to robbery, possibly to murder, depending on how many crimes the gang had committed during his 6 months with them. The fact that he'd eventually done the right thing didn't erase the months when he'd done the wrong thing. But Morrison was right about one thing. Guilt was easy. Guilt was just sitting in the darkness, accepting that you were damned and doing nothing about it. Real change, real redemption, required stepping into the light even when you knew it might burn you. The door creaked open. Elias expected Hutchins again, or maybe Dr. Morrison checking his stitches. Instead, a small figure slipped into the room, moving quietly as a shadow. Sarah Bennett. She looked better than the last time he'd seen her, cleaner, dressed in clothes that actually fit, her hair brushed and braided. But her eyes still carried that terrible old quality, that knowledge of horrors no child should have witnessed. "You're awake," she said quietly, standing uncertainly near the door as if ready to flee. "I am. You shouldn't be here, Sarah. You should be resting, playing, being a kid." "I don't know how to do that anymore." Her voice was matter-of-fact, stripped of self-pity. "Mrs. Hutchins, she's been taking care of me. She tries to get me to play with the other children, but they don't understand. They look at me different now." Elias knew that look. He'd seen it in mirrors for 8 years. The way people's eyes slid away when they sensed you were marked by something dark, something they didn't want to acknowledge. They will understand eventually, or they won't, and you'll find other people who do. But Sarah, you can't let what happened define your whole life. Your family wouldn't want that. How do you know what they'd want? You didn't know them. You're right, I didn't, but I knew people like them. Decent people trying to make an honest living, trying to raise their children right. And I can't imagine any parent wanting their child to spend the rest of their life trapped in the worst moment they ever experienced. Sarah moved closer, her small face serious. Mrs. Hutchins said you almost died stopping the men who killed my family. She said you didn't have to, that you could have stayed safe, but you went anyway. I did what needed doing. Why? It was such a simple question, but it cut right to the heart of everything. Why had he ridden out? Why had he risked his life? The easy answer was justice, or protecting the Patterson family, or stopping the Varnes gang. But sitting there, looking at this little girl who'd lost everything, Elias found himself confronting a deeper truth. Because I helped make them what they were, he said quietly. A long time ago, I rode with those men. I was part of their gang, and when I finally saw how evil they were, I ran away instead of stopping them. I've been running for 8 years, Sarah. 8 years of telling myself I was better than them, that walking away was enough. But it wasn't, because they kept hurting people. They hurt your family, and that blood is on my hands too, in a way. Sarah absorbed this with the strange calm of children who've already seen the worst the world can offer. So you were a bad man. Yes. But you're trying to be good now. Yes. Is it working? Elias had to think about that. Was it working? Was redemption even possible for someone like him, or was he just play-acting at virtue while the stain of his crimes remained indelible? I don't know, he admitted, but I'm trying. That's all I can do. Try to be better than I was, and hope that it matters. Sarah was quiet for a moment, her small fingers playing with the hem of her dress. Then she said something that nearly broke Elias's heart. I want to try too, to be better than I am, to not be the scared, sad girl all the time, but I don't know how. Elias reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, he took her small hand in his scarred one. You do it the same way I do, he said. One day at a time, one choice at a time. Some days you'll fail, some days the fear and the sadness will win. But you keep trying anyway. You keep getting up. And maybe, eventually, the good days start to outnumber the bad ones. Promise? He wanted to. He wanted to promise this little girl that everything would be okay, that the pain would fade, that she'd grow up to be happy and whole. But he'd learned the hard way that some promises were lies dressed up in good intentions. I can't promise that, he said gently, but I can promise that I'll do everything I can to help you get there, and that you won't be alone in trying. Sarah squeezed his hand, and for just a moment, some of the terrible age left her eyes. She looked almost like the 8-year-old she was supposed to be. The deputy is coming, she said. I heard Mrs. Hutchins talking about it. She sounded worried about you. She has reason to be. I did some bad things in my past, Sarah. Things I'm going to have to answer for. This deputy, Carson, he's going to want to know all about it. And when he does, I might end up in prison or worse. That's not fair. You saved people. You stopped the bad men. Life isn't always fair. Sometimes we have to pay for our mistakes even when we're trying to do better. But, Sarah, Elias's voice was firm but gentle. Whatever happens to me, whatever the deputy decides, I need you to remember something. You survived. You're alive. And that means you have a future, a chance to become whoever you want to be. Don't waste it being angry or scared. Use it. Build something good out of all this pain. She nodded, tears forming in her eyes for the first time since entering the room. I'll try. That's all any of us can do. She left shortly after, and Elias was alone again with his thoughts and his pain. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Beautiful, despite everything. The world kept turning, kept being beautiful, even when individual lives shattered like dropped glass. The next 3 days passed in a haze of healing and waiting. Dr. Morrison visited twice daily to check Elias's stitches and change his bandages, each time pronouncing himself cautiously optimistic about the healing. Hutchins brought meals and conversation, carefully avoiding any mention of the approaching deputy. Patterson stopped by once more with his wife, a strong-willed woman named Catherine, who hugged Elias despite his protests about his injuries and told him he'd always have a place at their table. Other visitors came too. People from town who'd heard the story, who wanted to see the man who'd taken down the Varnes gang. Some were grateful. Some were curious. A few were suspicious, their eyes asking questions they didn't voice. And every evening, just before dark, Sarah Bennett would slip into his room and sit quietly in the chair Hutchins usually occupied. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat in companionable silence. Either way, it seemed to help both of them. On the fourth day after waking, Elias finally felt strong enough to stand. Dr. Morrison protested, but Elias ignored him, swinging his legs carefully over the side of the bed and planting his feet on the floor. The room spun for a moment, then steadied. He was weaker than he'd ever been, his legs shaky as a newborn colt's. But he was standing. That counted for something. By the fifth day, he could walk to the window and back without needing to stop and catch his breath. By the sixth, he could make it downstairs to the trading post's main room, where Hutchins had set up a chair for him near the stove. It was there, on the seventh day, that Deputy Thomas Carson finally arrived. Elias heard the horse before he saw the rider, a strong, steady gait that spoke of long miles traveled with purpose. Through the trading post's front window, he watched as a tall man dismounted in the street, dusting off his coat with methodical movements. The badge on his chest caught the afternoon light. Carson wasn't what Elias had expected. He'd pictured someone older, harder, with the weathered look of a man who'd spent decades enforcing law in lawless places. Instead, the deputy looked to be in his early 30s, lean and sharp-eyed, with the bearing of someone educated beyond the frontier norm. He wore his gun low and easy, but there was something about him that suggested he preferred thinking his way through problems rather than shooting. The deputy secured his horse, spoke briefly to someone on the street, then turned toward the trading post. His eyes found Elias through the window, and for a moment the two men simply looked at each other. Then Carson pushed through the door. Elias Crowe. His voice was cultured, with traces of an Eastern education underneath the Western practicality. That's me. Deputy Thomas Carson, Territorial Marshal's office. He didn't offer his hand, just stood there studying Elias with sharp intelligence. I'm here about the Bennett massacre and the subsequent deaths of Marcus Garrett and Cole Varnes. I figured. I've already spoken with Marshal Hendricks, Dr. Morrison, and the Patterson family. Their accounts align on the basic facts, but there are some questions that remain unanswered. Carson pulled out a small notebook, flipping it open. Questions I'm hoping you can help me with. I'll tell you whatever you want to know. Carson's eyebrows rose slightly. Just like that? No lawyer? No time to prepare your story? My story's been the same for 8 years. Changing it now would be pointless. 8 years. Carson's eyes sharpened. Interesting that you chose that specific time frame. That's how long it's been since the Devil's Throat massacre. Elias felt Hutchins tense behind the counter, but he kept his own expression neutral. Yes, it is. You know, when I was researching the Varnes gang for this investigation, I pulled the old reports from Devil's Throat. 23 settlers killed, 5 gang members dead in the aftermath. But there was a 6th, a man named Elias Crowe, who was assumed killed but whose body was never found. There was a lot of confusion that day. Easy for bodies to get lost in the desert. Except you're not dead. Carson closed the notebook, his eyes never leaving Elias's face. You're very much alive. And you somehow knew exactly where the Varnes gang would strike next, had the skills to take down 3 of the most dangerous outlaws in the territory, and according to the hired gun we picked up, a man named Daniels who's singing like a canary to avoid hanging, you knew Marcus and Garrett Varnes personally, called them by their first names, mentioned Devil's Throat by name. Daniels talks too much. He talks enough. So here's what I think happened, Mr. Crowe. I think you rode with the Varnes gang 8 years ago. I think you were at Devil's Throat when those settlers were killed. And I think something happened that day that made you disappear. Maybe guilt, maybe fear, maybe you just got tired of the life. You've been hiding ever since, trying to be someone else. Then the Varnes gang showed up in your new territory, killed the Bennetts, and you decided it was time to settle old accounts. Elias said nothing, just waited. Am I close? Carson asked. Close enough. The admission hung in the air between them. Hutchins made a small sound behind the counter. Through the window, Elias could see people gathering in the street, drawn by the presence of the territorial deputy. Carson studied him for a long moment. "You're not denying it." "Would there be a point? You've already done the work. Put the pieces together." "Yes, I rode with the Varnes gang. For 6 months, 8 years ago. We robbed stages, rustled cattle, terrorized small ranches. I'm guilty of all of that." "And Devil's Throat?" "I was there. I saw what was happening, saw them starting to kill women and children for no reason except cruelty. I shot one of my own gang members trying to stop it. Then I ran." "You didn't go to the authorities. Would you have believed me? Would anyone? I was an outlaw confessing to crimes, my word against a gang that would have hunted me down and killed me slow. So I ran, and I've been running ever since." Carson was quiet, his fingers drumming on his notebook. Finally he said, "I'm going to need you to come with me." "To stand trial?" "To give a full statement, at minimum. What happens after that?" Carson shrugged. "Will depend on a lot of factors. What you knew, what you did, what you tried to stop. The fact that you killed the Varnes brothers might count in your favor, or it might just be seen as one criminal eliminating competition." "I understand." Elias stood slowly, his healing wound protesting. "Give me a moment to gather my things." "Elias, wait!" Hutchins stepped forward, his face troubled. "You don't have to do this. You could... run?" Elias shook his head. "I'm done running, Hutchins. It's time to face what I've been avoiding for 8 years. But they might hang you. They might. But at least I'll hang as myself, not as whoever I was pretending to be." Before Carson could respond, the trading post door burst open and Sarah Bennett rushed in, her eyes wide with panic. "No!" she shouted, running to Elias and grabbing his hand. "You can't take him. He saved us. He stopped the bad men." Carson's expression softened slightly. "Are you Sarah Bennett?" She nodded, clutching Elias's hand tighter. "I've read about what happened to your family. I'm very sorry for your loss." Carson's voice was gentle now, the lawman's hardness temporarily set aside. "And you're right. Mr. Crowe did stop the men who hurt you. But sometimes people do good things and bad things both, and we have to answer for all of it." "But he's good. He's trying to be good." "I know." Carson looked at Elias. "And that will be taken into account. I promise you that." Elias knelt down, ignoring the pain it caused, bringing himself eye level with Sarah. "Remember what we talked about? About doing the right thing even when it's hard?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "This is me doing that. I have to answer for my past, Sarah. I have to face what I did wrong before I can really move forward. Do you understand?" "But what if they hurt you? What if you don't come back?" "Then you keep going anyway. You keep trying to be better, to build something good. You don't let my mistakes or my choices stop you from becoming who you're meant to be." She threw her arms around his neck, sobbing. Elias held her carefully, aware of Carson watching, aware of Hutchins' troubled expression, aware that this might be the last time he ever saw this little girl who'd somehow become important to him. "Be strong," he whispered. "Be brave. Be better than all of us." When she finally pulled back, Mrs. Hutchins had appeared to collect her, gently leading the crying child away. Carson waited patiently, saying nothing, his face unreadable. Elias stood, gathering the few possessions he'd accumulated, his rifle, his saddlebags, the clothes Hutchins had bought him when he first arrived. It all fit in one small bundle. "I'm ready," he said. Carson nodded. "We'll need to ride to Silver Creek. That's where the territorial court sits. It's 3 days' journey. Can he even ride?" Dr. Morrison had appeared in the doorway, his medical bag in hand. "He's still healing." "I can ride," Elias said. "Then I'm coming with you," Morrison announced. "If his wound reopens on the trail, he'll need medical attention." Carson considered this, then nodded. "Appreciated, Doctor. We leave in 1 hour." The next hour was a blur of preparation and farewells. Hutchins pressed money into Elias's hand. Wages owed, he said, though it was more than any trading post clerk would earn. Catherine Patterson brought food for the journey. Even Marshal Hendricks showed up, looking uncomfortable, to wish Elias luck in a gruff voice. And through it all, Elias felt a strange sense of peace settling over him. For 8 years, he'd been running from this moment, the moment when he'd have to face the consequences of his choices, good and bad alike. Now that it was here, now that there was no more hiding, he felt almost relieved. The past was catching up. But maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what needed to happen. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, 3 riders left Broken Ridge, Deputy Carson in the lead, Dr. Morrison beside him, and Elias Crowe bringing up the rear on a borrowed horse. Behind them, Sarah Bennett watched from the trading post window, her small hand pressed against the glass. Ahead of them lay Silver Creek, Judgment, and whatever future remained for a man trying to balance 8 years of running against 1 moment of standing his ground. The territory stretched out before them, vast and indifferent, as it had always been. The trail to Silver Creek cut through high country where the air grew thin and cold, where pine forests gave way to rocky outcroppings that looked like the bones of the earth pushing through skin. They rode in silence for most of the first day, Carson leading with the steady confidence of a man who'd traveled these paths many times, Morrison keeping pace with the careful attention of someone monitoring a patient, and Elias bringing up the rear, each step of his horse sending small jolts of pain through his healing wound. By late afternoon, the sky had turned the color of bruised flesh, heavy clouds rolling in from the west. Carson glanced back at his companions, assessing, then pointed toward a cluster of rocks ahead. "There's an overhang up there. We'll make camp before the storm hits." They reached shelter just as the first fat drops began to fall. Within minutes, the sky opened up completely, rain hammering down in sheets that turned the world gray and formless. Carson built a small fire in the protected space beneath the rocks, while Morrison checked Elias's bandages, tisking at the small spots of fresh blood that had seeped through. "You're reopening the wound," the doctor said, his tone stern. "I told you riding was too much too soon. And I told you I could manage it. Managing and healing aren't the same thing." Carson looked up from the fire he was coaxing to life. "How bad is it, doctor?" "Not life-threatening, but not good either. Another day like this, and we'll have real problems." Morrison began rewrapping the wound with clean bandages from his bag. "He needs rest, Deputy. Real rest, not this. We're 2 days from Silver Creek. Stopping now would only delay the inevitable." Carson's voice wasn't unkind, but it was firm. "And frankly, I have orders to bring Mr. Crowe in with all due speed." The territorial marshal was very clear about that. "The territorial marshal isn't the one who'll have to explain why his prisoner died of infection on the trail," Morrison shot back. "I'm not going to die," Elias said quietly. Both men looked at him. "I've survived worse than a reopened bullet wound. I'll make it to Silver Creek." Carson studied him in the firelight, his sharp eyes thoughtful. "You're awfully eager to face judgment for a man who spent 8 years running from it." "I'm not eager. I'm just tired of running." "There's a difference between tired and ready. Which are you?" It was a good question, one Elias had been asking himself since they left Broken Ridge. Was he ready to face what waited in Silver Creek? The questions, the accusations, the possibility of a rope around his neck? Or was he just exhausted with the constant vigilance, the looking over his shoulder, the loneliness of being someone he wasn't? "Maybe they're the same thing," he said finally. "Maybe being tired enough is what makes you ready." Carson was quiet for a moment, then reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a bottle of whiskey. He offered it first to Morrison, who took a small sip, then to Elias. "You know what I find interesting, Crowe?" Carson said, taking his own drink. "I've arrested a lot of men in my time, killers, thieves, men who'd done terrible things. And most of them spent every minute trying to convince me they were innocent, that they'd been wrongly accused, that someone else was to blame. But you're the first man I've ever taken into custody who didn't offer a single excuse. Would it matter if I did? Probably not, but it tells me something about you." Carson settled back against the rock wall, the bottle resting on his knee. "It tells me you actually believe you deserve what's coming, don't I? That's for a court to decide. But I've read the reports from Devil's Throat, talked to survivors, pieced together what happened that day. And here's what I know. When those settlers started dying, when the Varnes gang turned that canyon into a killing ground, there was one man who tried to stop it. One man who shot his own brother in arms rather than let an innocent woman be dragged off to the rocks. That man was you." Elias took another drink, the whiskey burning down his throat. "And then I ran. Left those people dead and dying and ran like a coward. Or you ran because staying would have meant dying yourself, and dying wouldn't have brought anyone back. Carson's voice was measured, analytical. I'm not saying you made the right choice. I'm saying I understand why you made it. And I think that understanding matters when we're trying to figure out who you are. A criminal who got lucky. Or a man who made mistakes and spent 8 years trying to be better. Morrison was watching the exchange with interest, his medical bag forgotten beside him. The rain continued its assault on the world outside their shelter, creating a strange intimacy in the firelit space. What do you think will happen? Elias asked. In Silver Creek. When I stand before the territorial judge. Carson was quiet for a long moment. Honestly? I don't know. Judge Blackwood is fair but hard. He doesn't have much patience for outlaws, but he also believes in proportional justice. The fact that you killed the Varnes brothers might count in your favor. They were wanted men, and bringing them to justice, even by bullet, serves the law's purpose. But you were part of their gang. You participated in crimes. Devil's throat hangs over everything, no matter what you tried to do that day. And the law doesn't always distinguish between the men who pulled triggers and the men who rode alongside them. So I might hang anyway. You might, or you might face prison time. Or if Blackwood sees what I'm starting to see, he might find a way to balance your crimes against your redemption. But Crowe, Carson leaned forward, his eyes intense. You need to understand something. Whatever happens in that courtroom, whatever judgment comes down, the real question isn't what the law decides about you. It's what you decide about yourself. Elias didn't know how to respond to that, so he said nothing, just watched the fire dance and crackle while the storm raged outside. Eventually, Morrison declared it was time to sleep, and they arranged their bedrolls in the narrow space, each man lost in his own thoughts. But sleep didn't come easy for Elias. He lay awake listening to the rain, thinking about Sarah Bennett's tear-streaked face, about Hutchins' worried eyes, about the weight of 8 years pressing down on him like water at the bottom of a deep well. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called, its voice lonely and searching. The storm passed before dawn, leaving the world washed clean and dripping. They broke camp early, Carson eager to make up time, and rode through country still slick with rain. The clouds had cleared, revealing a sky so blue it hurt to look at, and the sun climbed bright and merciless as they descended from the high country toward the valley where Silver Creek lay. They stopped briefly at midday to water the horses and eat some of the food Catherine Patterson had packed. Elias's wound had stopped bleeding again, much to Morrison's relief, though the doctor still insisted on checking it every few hours with the diligence of a man who took his oath seriously. As they prepared to mount up again, Carson's horse suddenly went tense, ears pricked forward. The deputy's hand dropped to his gun, his body language shifting instantly from relaxed to alert. "We're being watched," he said quietly. Elias had already sensed it, that prickle on the back of his neck that came from years of living on the edge of violence. He scanned the tree line 50 yards to their left, looking for movement, for the glint of metal, for anything that didn't belong. "How many?" Morrison whispered, his face pale. "Can't tell. Could be 1, could be 5. Carson's voice was steady, professional. "Crowe, you armed?" "Revolver. Carson took my rifle when we left Broken Ridge." "Right. Well, you're getting it back temporarily." Carson pulled Elias's Winchester from his saddle scabbard and tossed it over. "If this goes bad, I need you to fight, not run." "Understood?" Elias caught the rifle, checking its load automatically. "Understood. Doctor, stay behind us and keep low. If shooting starts, get to cover and stay there." "I'm not completely useless in a fight, Deputy. I was a field surgeon, remember? Which means you're valuable alive. Now get behind us." Morrison complied, though his expression suggested he wasn't happy about it. Carson and Elias positioned themselves side by side, weapons ready, facing the tree line where the unseen watchers lurked. For a long moment, nothing happened. Just the wind moving through the trees, the nervous stamping of horses, the sound of 3 men breathing. Then a voice called out from the trees, rough and mocking. "Well, well, Elias Crowe, heard you were dead." Elias felt his blood turn to ice water. He knew that voice, Jake Reeves, one of the hired guns who'd ridden with the Varnes gang 8 years ago. A mean, dangerous man who'd enjoyed the violence a little too much even by outlaw standards. "Reeves," Elias called back. "Thought you'd be in Mexico by now." "Thought a lot of things. Thought the Varnes brothers were untouchable." Thought you were dead. Seems we were both wrong. Movement in the trees, 3 figures emerging, all armed, all wearing the hard faces of men who lived by the gun. Reeves was in the center, older than Elias remembered, with new scars crossing his face like angry roads. Heard what you did at the Patterson Ranch. Heard you killed Marcus and Garrett both. That true? It's true. And Cole? Him too. Reeves spat on the ground. Never liked the Varnes brothers much. Too quick to violence, not enough thinking. But they paid well and they kept their word. Now they're dead because of you. Carson's voice cut in, hard and official. I'm Deputy Thomas Carson of the Territorial Marshal's Office. These men are under my protection. Whatever grievance you have with Crowe, it ends here. Reeves laughed, a sound like gravel being crushed. Deputy, you're outnumbered and outgunned. Whatever authority you think you have stops about 50 feet from where you're standing. This is between me and Crowe. The hell it is. Crowe is my prisoner, being transported to Silver Creek to face trial. You interfere with that, you're interfering with the law. The law? Reeves said it like a curse. The law doesn't reach everywhere, Deputy. Out here, might makes right. And I've got the might. Elias could see how this would play out. Reeves wanted revenge for the Varnes brothers, or maybe just wanted to kill the man who'd survived when so many others hadn't. Either way, talking wouldn't solve this. Only bullets would. Carson, Elias said quietly, when this starts, you take the one on the left. I'll take Reeves. The third one will probably run. He's young, looks scared. There's not going to be a fight, Carson said firmly. Nobody's dying on this trail today. That's awful optimistic, Deputy. It's the law, and I enforce it. Carson raised his voice again. Reeves, I'm giving you one chance to walk away. You and your men turn around right now, and I'll forget this encounter ever happened. But if you force my hand, I will arrest you or kill you, whichever proves necessary. Reeves's smile widened. You got sand, Deputy. I'll give you that. But sand doesn't stop bullets. He went for his gun. Everything happened at once. Elias's rifle was already coming up as Reeves's hand blurred toward his holster. Carson drew with practiced speed, his revolver clearing leather clean and fast. The young gunman on the right dove sideways, just as Elias had predicted, wanting no part of what was about to happen. Elias fired first, his bullet taking Reeves in the shoulder before the man's gun had fully cleared. Reeves stumbled back, cursing, still trying to bring his weapon to bear. Carson's shot boomed out a heartbeat later, catching the left gunman's center mass and dropping him like a stone. Reeves finally got his gun up and fired wild, his shot going wide. Elias worked the lever on his Winchester and fired again, this time aiming for the leg. Reeves went down hard, his gun falling from nerveless fingers. The young gunman was already running, crashing through the underbrush like a panicked deer. Carson tracked him with his revolver but didn't fire. Let him go, Elias said. He's just a kid trying to act tough. He won't be back. Carson kept his gun trained on the tree line for another few seconds, then lowered it slowly. Check the bodies. Make sure they're down. Elias approached Reeves carefully, rifle ready, while Carson moved to the man he'd shot. Morrison emerged from behind the horses, his face pale, but his hand steady as he grabbed his medical bag. Reeves was still alive, bleeding from the shoulder and leg, his face twisted with pain and rage. You son of a bitch! You shot me twice! Could have been 3. Could have been fatal. Elias kicked Reeves's gun out of reach. Why'd you come after me, Jake? The Varnes brothers are dead. The gang's finished. What's the point? The point is you're a traitor. You rode with us, then you killed us. That deserves an answer. I'm riding to Silver Creek to give that answer. To a judge. To the law. Reeves laughed, though it came out more like a cough. The law? You actually believe that matters? You think standing in front of some judge is going to clean your conscience? Maybe not, but it's better than running forever. Carson appeared beside them, holstering his gun. The other one's dead. Clean shot to the heart. He looked down at Reeves. You're under arrest for attempted murder of a territorial officer and interference with legal custody. Dr. Morrison will patch you up enough to ride. Then you're coming with us to Silver Creek. The hell I am? The hell you're not. You just tried to kill a deputy. That's a hanging offense. Carson's voice was flat, final. Be grateful we're letting you live long enough to stand trial. Morrison knelt beside Reeves, already pulling out instruments and bandages. This is going to hurt. Everything hurts, Doc. What's a little more? While Morrison worked, Elias and Carson dragged the dead gunman's body into the shade and covered it with stones. It was grim work, silent work, the kind of task that reminded you how cheap life could be out here in the territories. When they were done, Carson looked at Elias. You could have run. During the fight, when I was distracted. You could have taken a horse and disappeared. Where would I go? We've already established I'm tired of running. Still, it would have been easy. Easy and right aren't always the same thing. Carson nodded slowly, something like respect showing in his eyes. No, they're not. Morrison finished patching Reeves well enough to travel, though the outlaw looked gray-faced and shaky. They rigged a travois from branches and canvas to carry him behind one of the horses, since he couldn't sit a saddle with his injuries. It slowed them down considerably, but there was no choice. As they rode on through the afternoon, Elias found himself thinking about what Reeves had said, about whether standing before a judge would really matter, whether admitting guilt to the law could somehow balance the scales of his conscience. He didn't have good answers. All he had was the conviction that doing the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it might cost him everything, was the only path forward he could live with. The sun was setting when Silver Creek finally came into view, nestled in a valley between two ridges like a secret waiting to be discovered. It was bigger than Broken Ridge, more established, with actual streets and buildings that looked permanent rather than temporary. The territorial courthouse sat on the main street, a two-story structure of stone and timber that radiated authority even from a distance. Carson led them straight there, past curious onlookers who stopped to stare at the strange procession. A deputy, a wounded prisoner, a doctor, and another wounded man on a travois. By the time they reached the courthouse steps, a small crowd had gathered. A heavy-set man emerged from the building, wearing a marshal's badge that caught the dying light. He was older than Carson, somewhere in his 50s, with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much of humanity's worst impulses. Carson, wasn't expecting you until tomorrow. We made good time, Marshal Brennan, until we ran into trouble. Carson dismounted, gesturing to Reeves on the travois. Jake Reeves, wanted for robbery and murder in 3 territories. He ambushed us on the trail, tried to kill me and free the prisoner. We defended ourselves. Brennan's eyes moved to Elias. So this is the famous Elias Crowe, the man who killed the Varnes gang. 3 of them, Elias corrected, climbing carefully down from his horse. The rest scattered. Still, that's impressive work. Stupid, but impressive. Brennan looked back at Carson. Judge Blackwood's been waiting for you. Cleared his schedule for tomorrow morning. You'll present your prisoner then. Understood. In the meantime, I need Reeves locked up in the infirmary cell until Dr. Morrison here says he's fit to stand trial. And Crowe needs quarters. He's wounded too, and I gave my word he'd be treated fairly. Brennan considered this, then nodded. Reeves goes to the infirmary under guard. Crowe can have a cell in the courthouse basement. It's clean, dry, and secure. Dr. Morrison, you're welcome to stay at the boarding house down the street. Territorial government will cover your expenses. I prefer to stay near my patients, Morrison said. Both of them. The courthouse has a guest room for visiting physicians. It's yours. Brennan gestured to several men who'd emerged from the building. Get Reeves to the infirmary. Crowe goes to cell 3. Carson, come inside and make your report. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Elias was processed, his possessions catalogued and stored, his wound examined by the town doctor, who declared Morrison's work excellent but recommended rest and no strenuous activity. Then he was led down narrow stairs into the courthouse basement, where 3 cells sat in a row. Cell 3 was as Brennan had promised, clean, dry, with a cot, a blanket, and a small window near the ceiling that let in the last rays of twilight. The door clanged shut behind him with a finality that should have been terrifying but somehow wasn't. He was locked up, trapped, unable to run even if he wanted to. And yet, for the first time in 8 years, Elias felt something close to peace. He lay down on the cot, his body finally allowing itself to acknowledge the exhaustion of the journey, the pain of his wound, the weight of everything that had happened since that morning when Sarah Bennett had stumbled into Broken Ridge covered in blood. Tomorrow, he would face Judge Blackwood. Tomorrow, the reckoning would begin in earnest. But tonight, he could rest without looking over his shoulder, without wondering if this would be the day his past caught up to him. It already had, and he was still breathing. Footsteps on the stairs drew his attention. Carson appeared, carrying a tray with food and water. He passed it through the cell bars without comment, then stood there watching Elias with those sharp, analytical eyes. "You did good today," Carson said finally. "During the ambush. You could have complicated things, but you didn't. I told you. I'm done running." Most men say that, few mean it. Carson pulled out a chair and sat, as if settling in for a conversation. "Can I ask you something, Crowe, off the record?" "Sure." "Why did you really come back? I mean, you could have kept running forever. Changed your name again, moved to California or Oregon, started fresh somewhere the Varnes gang would never find you. Why stop in Broken Ridge? Why stay?" Elias thought about it, really thought about it for the first time. "I don't know if I can explain it. I was just tired. Tired of being nobody. Tired of living half a life. Tired of carrying the weight of Devil's Throat around with me everywhere I went. When I rode into Broken Ridge, something in me just said, enough. This is where I stop." And then the Varnes gang showed up. Yeah, like fate had decided to test whether I meant it. You think fate works that way? Arranging coincidences to test people? I think sometimes the universe puts you exactly where you need to be, whether you like it or not. Maybe I was supposed to be in Broken Ridge when Sarah Bennett came stumbling in. Maybe that was always where my road was leading. Carson was quiet for a moment. "You know what I think? I think you're a decent man who made some bad choices, learned from them, and spent 8 years trying to atone. I think what you did at the Patterson Ranch proves that, and I think Judge Blackwood will see it too. And if he doesn't, then you'll face whatever comes with the same courage you showed facing the Varnes brothers. That's all any of us can do." Carson stood, preparing to leave. At the stairs, he paused. "Get some rest, Crowe. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." After he left, Elias ate the food mechanically, tasting nothing, his mind already moving ahead to the courtroom, to the questions he'd have to answer, to the judgment that waited. He thought about Sarah's face, about Hutchins' faith in him, about the look in Marcus Varnes' eyes when he'd recognized Elias after 8 years. He thought about the settlers at Devil's Throat, whose names he'd never learned but whose screams still echoed in his nightmares. He thought about redemption and whether it was something you could earn or something you had to be given. And he thought about the man he'd been 8 years ago, younger, angrier, looking for belonging in all the wrong places, and the man he'd tried to become since. Were they the same person? Could you fundamentally change who you were? Or were you always just carrying your worst self around like a shadow, waiting for the moment it would emerge again? He didn't have answers, but tomorrow, in Judge Blackwood's courtroom, he'd have to try to find them. Outside his small window, night settled over Silver Creek like a benediction. Somewhere in the darkness, people were living their lives, unaware that in a courthouse basement, a man wrestled with questions of guilt and innocence, of justice and mercy, of whether the past could ever truly be escaped or only confronted. Elias closed his eyes, letting exhaustion finally claim him. His last conscious thought was of Sarah Bennett and the promise he'd made her. Keep trying, keep getting up, make the good days outnumber the bad. Tomorrow, in front of Judge Blackwood and anyone else who wanted to watch, he'd try to do exactly that. The trial would determine his fate, but the man he'd become in the last 8 years, that would determine whether he could live with whatever fate was decided. And in a strange way, that was the only verdict that really mattered. Morning came too soon and not soon enough. Elias had slept in fits and starts, waking repeatedly to the sound of his own breathing in the small cell, to the distant voices of night guards changing shifts, to the weight of what awaited him pressing down like a physical thing. When gray light finally filtered through the high window, he was already awake, sitting on the edge of the cot with his hands clasped between his knees. Footsteps on the stairs announced Carson's arrival. The deputy carried a clean shirt, a razor, and a basin of water. "Figured you'd want to look presentable," Carson said, unlocking the cell. "Judge Blackwood appreciates a man who shows respect for the court." Elias took the items, grateful. "What time?" 9 o'clock. "Court convenes in 2 hours. You'll have breakfast, clean up, and then we'll go over your testimony one more time." "I've told you everything." "I know, but juries are unpredictable. And even though this is just a preliminary hearing to determine if there's enough evidence to proceed to trial, first impressions matter. Blackwood will be watching how you carry yourself, how you answer questions, whether you show remorse or defiance. Elias began washing his face, the cold water shocking him fully awake. What should I show? The truth. Whatever that is for you. Carson leaned against the cell doorframe. I've watched you for days now, Crowe. I've seen how you handle pain, how you face danger, how you talk about your past. And here's what I think. You're not a man trying to escape judgment. You're a man who's already judged himself and found yourself wanting. That kind of honesty is rare. Honesty doesn't erase what I did. No, but it might convince Blackwood that you understand the gravity of it. And that understanding is the first step toward justice. Breakfast arrived shortly after. Eggs, bacon, bread, coffee that was strong enough to strip paint. Elias ate mechanically, his stomach tight with anticipation. Through the window he could hear Silver Creek waking up, the sounds of a town going about its business, while he sat in a cell waiting to learn whether he'd spend the rest of his life behind bars or at the end of a rope. At 8:30, Carson returned with Marshal Brennan and 2 guards. They fitted Elias with manacles, hands in front, connected by a short chain, and led him up the stairs into the main courthouse. The building was already filling with people, word having spread that the man who killed the Varnes gang would be appearing before Judge Blackwood today. The courtroom itself was imposing, all dark wood and high ceilings, with benches for spectators, and a raised platform where the judge would sit. Elias was led to a table on the left side of the room, where Carson took a seat beside him. Across the aisle sat a severe-looking man in his 40s, dressed in a black suit that screamed authority. "That's Prosecutor Nathaniel Cross," Carson whispered. "He's territorial, assigned to major cases. Fair, but aggressive. He'll push hard on your time with the Varnes gang." I expected that. The gallery filled quickly, every bench packed with curious onlookers. Elias recognized a few faces. Dr. Morrison sitting in the front row, Hutchins beside him looking anxious, and to his shock, Catherine Patterson with her husband Thomas. They'd ridden 3 days to be here. Then the side door opened and Sarah Bennett walked in, holding Mrs. Hutchins' hand. The little girl's eyes found Elias immediately, and something in her face, hope mixed with fear, made his chest tighten. "All rise!" Everyone stood as Judge Cornelius Blackwood entered. He was exactly what Elias had imagined. Tall, lean, somewhere in his 60s, with steel-gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. His eyes swept the courtroom with the practiced assessment of a man who'd seen every kind of human weakness and wasn't impressed by any of it. Blackwood took his seat, and everyone else followed. The judge arranged some papers before him, then looked directly at Elias. "Mr. Crowe, you stand accused of multiple crimes committed in association with the Varnes gang approximately 8 years ago, including robbery, cattle rustling, and accessory to murder. How do you plead?" Elias stood, his chains clinking softly. "Guilty, Your Honor. To the robbery and rustling. But I tried to stop the murders at Devil's Throat. I killed one of my own gang members trying to prevent them." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Blackwood's gavel came down once, sharp and final, silencing it. "This is a preliminary hearing, Mr. Crowe, not a trial. You'll have ample opportunity to explain your version of events. For now, I'm here to determine if sufficient evidence exists to proceed to a full trial." He turned to Prosecutor Cross. "Proceed with your presentation." Cross stood, buttoning his jacket with practiced precision. "Thank you, Your Honor. The territorial government will demonstrate that Elias Crowe willingly joined the Varnes gang in the spring of 1867, participated in numerous criminal enterprises over a 6-month period, and was present at the Devil's Throat massacre, where 23 innocent settlers were murdered in cold blood." He pulled out a folder, extracting documents that he laid before the judge. "We have witness statements from 3 survivors of Devil's Throat who saw Mr. Crowe among the gang members. We have records of robberies committed during the period of his association, and we have his own admission, just now, that he participated in these crimes." Blackwood reviewed the documents carefully. "Deputy Carson, you arrested Mr. Crowe." Carson stood. "I did, Your Honor, though arrested might be too strong a word. He surrendered himself voluntarily once I identified him as the former gang member who'd been presumed dead." "Voluntarily?" "Yes, sir. He made no attempt to flee or resist. In fact, he'd already decided to face justice before I arrived in Broken Ridge. Cross's eyes narrowed. Your Honor, I'd like to note that surrender doesn't erase culpability. Many criminals turn themselves in when they believe capture is inevitable. It's a calculated move, not true remorse. Duly noted, Mr. Cross. Continue. Cross called his first witness, a rancher named William Hayes, who'd been robbed by the Varnes gang in August of 1867. Hayes was in his 50s now, weathered and bitter, and he described in vivid detail how 6 armed men had taken his cattle, his horses, and beaten him when he protested. Can you identify any of those men in this courtroom? Cross asked. Hayes pointed directly at Elias. That one. He was younger then, but I remember his face. He held a gun on my son while the others loaded our livestock. Cross turned to Elias. Do you deny this, Mr. Crowe? Elias met Hayes's eyes. No, I was there. I'm sorry for what we did to you and your family. The apology seemed to catch Hayes off guard. His expression flickered between anger and confusion before settling back into hard resentment. Cross called 2 more witnesses, both with similar stories of robbery and intimidation. Each time, Elias confirmed his presence and offered apologies that seemed to unsettle both the witnesses and the prosecutor. It was clear Cross had expected denials, excuses, the usual dance of a criminal trying to minimize his guilt. Then Cross moved to his final witness, and the temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop. Your Honor, I call Mrs. Elizabeth Thornton. An elderly woman stood from the gallery, moving slowly to the witness stand with the aid of a cane. She was frail, her hair white as snow, but her eyes were sharp and full of terrible memory. Mrs. Thornton, you were at Devil's Throat on the day of the massacre? I was. Her voice was surprisingly strong. My husband and I were traveling with a wagon train, 23 of us in total, heading west to start new lives. Can you tell the court what happened that day? Mrs. Thornton took a breath, and Elias could see her hands shaking where they gripped the cane. We were camped in the canyon for the night. The next morning, riders came, 9 of them. They said they needed supplies, food, water. My husband tried to negotiate, to give them what they wanted peacefully. Her voice broke slightly. But they didn't just want supplies, they wanted everything. And when we resisted, when some of the younger men tried to defend us, they started shooting. Just shooting everyone. Men, women, even the children. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of Mrs. Thornton's labored breathing. Elias felt like he was back in that canyon, hearing the screams, smelling the gunpowder and blood. Where were you during this? Cross asked gently. Hidden in a wagon with my daughter. We could hear everything, the shooting, the screaming, the begging, and the laughter. They laughed while they killed us. Mrs. Thornton, can you identify any of the men involved in that massacre in this courtroom? She looked directly at Elias, and he saw 8 years of grief and rage in her eyes. Him. He was one of them. Cross let that statement hang in the air. Are you certain? I saw him. After the shooting stopped, I looked out through a gap in the wagon cover. I saw him standing over a body, a gun in his hand. I saw his face. I'll never forget it. So Elias felt the weight of every eye in the courtroom on him. This was it, the moment that would define everything else. He could feel Carson tense beside him, could sense the crowd leaning forward in anticipation. Cross turned to face Elias. Mr. Crowe, Mrs. Thornton has identified you as one of the Devil's Throat killers. Do you deny it? Elias stood slowly, his chains rattling in the quiet. I was there. I was part of the gang. But, Mrs. Thornton, I need you to remember carefully, whose body was I standing over? The old woman's certainty flickered. It was one of the gang members, a younger man. His name was Dutch Keller, and I'd just shot him through the heart to stop him from dragging a young woman toward the rocks. That's why I had a gun in my hand. That's why I was standing over a body. Mrs. Thornton's face went pale. I don't understand. Carson stood. Your Honor, if I may, there's context here that needs to be provided. Blackwood nodded. Proceed. Carson pulled out his own folder containing statements he'd collected during his investigation. Your Honor, I interviewed 3 other survivors of Devil's Throat during my investigation. All of them confirmed the same thing. In the middle of the massacre, one of the gang members turned on his own,
shot Dutch Keller, then tried to stop the killing. When he failed, he fled into the desert.
He laid the statements before the judge. One witness described him as the only one with a conscience. Another said, "He tried to save us." These aren't the actions of a willing participant in mass murder. Cross's face had gone red. Your Honor, Mr. Crowe was still part of the gang, still participated in the crimes leading up to Devil's Throat. His supposed moment of conscience doesn't erase months of criminal activity. No, it doesn't, Blackwood agreed, but it does complicate the narrative. Mr. Crowe, stand and address the court. I want to hear, in your own words, what happened at Devil's Throat and why. Elias stood, feeling the weight of judgment pressing down on him like physical force. Every eye in the courtroom was locked on him. Mrs. Thornton with her confusion and pain, Sarah Bennett with her desperate hope, the Pattersons with something like faith, Prosecutor Cross with barely contained fury. I joined the Varnes gang because I was young and stupid and angry at the world, Elias began, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. I thought I was joining outlaws, men who lived free, who didn't bow to authority, who took what they needed from a system that was rigged against people like us. I told myself it was about freedom, about rejecting corruption. He paused, forcing himself to meet Mrs. Thornton's eyes. I was wrong. It wasn't about freedom. It was about power and cruelty and taking pleasure in other people's fear. I saw that more clearly with every robbery, every act of violence. But I told myself I wasn't as bad as the others. I never killed anyone. I just held the guns while they did the dirty work. That's still complicity, Cross interjected. It is, Elias agreed, and I own that. I own every robbery I participated in, every family I terrorized, every life I helped destroy. But Devil's Throat, that was different. When I saw what they were planning to do, when I heard Marcus Varnes say they were going to kill everyone just because they could, something broke in me. His voice roughened with emotion. I tried to stop it. I shot Dutch when he grabbed that woman. I yelled at the others to stop, to just take what we needed and go. And Marcus Varnes looked at me like I'd lost my mind and said, "We take everything, including their lives." That's when I knew I couldn't be one of them anymore. So you ran, Cross said, making it sound like cowardice. I ran, Elias confirmed. Because staying would have meant dying, and dying wouldn't have brought those people back. I ran, and I've spent every day since trying to be better than what I was, trying to live a life that might somehow balance what I'd done. Blackwood leaned forward. And the Varnes brothers? When you killed them at the Patterson Ranch, was that justice or revenge? It was the question Elias had been asking himself since that day in the barn. I don't know, Your Honor. Maybe both. Maybe neither. All I know is that when I heard they'd killed the Bennett family and were planning to do it again, I couldn't let them. Not when I had the power to stop it. Not when I knew what they were capable of because I'd ridden with them. So you rode out alone, wounded and outgunned, to face 9 armed men. I did. That seems suicidal, Mr. Crowe. Maybe it was. Or maybe I just didn't care anymore whether I lived or died, as long as I stopped them from hurting anyone else. Blackwood studied him for a long moment, those granite eyes revealing nothing. Then he turned to Mrs. Thornton. Ma'am, based on what you've heard, do you still believe Mr. Crowe was a willing participant in the Devil's Throat massacre? The old woman was quiet, her fingers working at her cane. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know. All I know is my husband died that day. My friends died. And someone should pay for it. Marcus, Garrett, and Cole Varnes paid, Carson said quietly. Mr. Crowe made sure of that. With bullets, not justice, Cross countered. Your Honor, the territorial government maintains that Mr. Crowe's criminal history demands prosecution regardless of his recent actions. A man doesn't erase robbery, assault, and accessory to murder by killing his former associates. Blackwood nodded slowly. Mr. Cross makes a valid point. The law exists to punish crimes, not to be negotiable based on subsequent behavior. He looked at Elias. However, the law also exists to serve justice, which is not always the same as punishment. He stood, and everyone in the courtroom stood with him. I'm going to take a recess to consider the evidence presented. We'll reconvene in 1 hour, at which point I'll render my decision on whether this case proceeds to trial, and, if so, under what charges. The gavel came down, and Blackwood disappeared into his chambers. The courtroom erupted in conversation, voices overlapping in speculation and argument. Carson put a hand on Elias's shoulder. You did well. You were honest, direct, and showed genuine remorse. That matters. Does it? Cross is right. I committed crimes. The law doesn't care why I stopped. The law is a tool, Crowe. How it's wielded depends on who's holding it, and Blackwood is a good man. If there's a path to justice that doesn't involve a rope, he'll find it. The guards led Elias to a small holding room off the courtroom where he could wait in relative privacy. Carson stayed with him, as did Dr. Morrison, who'd slipped away from the gallery. How's the wound? Morrison asked, his doctor's instincts overriding the drama of the hearing. Sore, but holding. When this is over, you need at least a week of complete rest, preferably 2. That tissue is still healing, and you keep pushing it. If this goes the way Cross wants, I'll have plenty of time to rest, probably in a cell. Morrison's expression softened. Have faith, Crowe. You did a terrible thing today. You told the truth in a courtroom. That's rarer than you think. The hour passed slowly, measured in heartbeats and shallow breaths. Elias found himself thinking about all the paths that had led to this moment, the decision to join the Varnes gang, the horror of Devil's Throat, the 8 years of running, the morning Sarah Bennett had stumbled into Broken Ridge. Every choice, every action, every consequence, all converging in a courtroom in Silver Creek where a man he'd never met would decide his fate. Finally, a clerk appeared at the door. Court's reconvening. Judge Blackwood is ready. They filed back into the courtroom, which had somehow filled even more densely than before. Sarah was still in the front row, her small hands clasped tightly in Mrs. Hutchins' larger ones. The Pattersons sat stoically, their presence a quiet vote of confidence. Mrs. Thornton had remained as well, her face drawn and tired. Blackwood entered, and everyone rose, then sat again at his gesture. The judge arranged papers before him with deliberate care, taking his time, building the tension. When he finally spoke, his voice carried absolute authority. I've reviewed the evidence presented, considered the testimony, and consulted relevant territorial statutes. This is my finding. He looked directly at Elias. Mr. Crowe, you have admitted to multiple counts of robbery and assault committed during your time with the Varnes gang. These are serious crimes that cannot be dismissed or ignored. Under normal circumstances, I would have no choice but to order you to stand trial with the expectation of significant prison time. Elias felt his stomach drop, but Blackwood wasn't finished. However, these are not normal circumstances. The evidence clearly shows that you attempted to prevent the Devil's Throat massacre, that you killed one of your own gang members in the process, and that your actions likely saved several lives. The survivor's statements support this, as does your subsequent behavior. 8 years of lawful living followed by a selfless and extremely dangerous action to stop the Varnes gang from committing further atrocities. The judge paused, his eyes sweeping the courtroom. The law serves many purposes, but chief among them is the protection of society and the rehabilitation of those who've broken its rules. In Mr. Crowe's case, rehabilitation appears to have already occurred. The man who rode with the Varnes gang 8 years ago and the man who faced them at the Patterson Ranch are demonstrably different people. Cross stood. Your Honor, with respect, that's not for this court to determine. Character change doesn't erase. I'm aware of what it does and doesn't erase, Mr. Cross. Sit down. The prosecutor sat, his jaw tight with frustration. Blackwood continued. Therefore, I am making the following ruling, Mr. Crowe will plead guilty to multiple counts of robbery and assault as charged. However, given the extraordinary circumstances of his case, I am sentencing him to 5 years of supervised probation rather than imprisonment. A collective gasp ran through the courtroom. Cross shot to his feet. Your Honor, that's unprecedented. The territorial government will appeal. The territorial government can do whatever it feels necessary, Mr. Cross. But this is my courtroom, and this is my ruling. Blackwood's voice was steel. Mr. Crowe's probation will be supervised by Deputy Carson, who will submit quarterly reports on his conduct and activities. He will remain within the territory, will make himself available for questioning regarding any ongoing investigations into the Varnes gang's activities, and will perform 200 hours of community service. He turned back to Elias. Additionally, you will provide restitution to the victims of the robberies you participated in. A list will be compiled and you will make payments as you are able. This debt may take years to satisfy, but you will satisfy it. Do you understand these terms? Elias stood, barely able to process what was happening. Yes, Your Honor. I understand. Good. Furthermore, I am officially recognizing your actions at the Patterson Ranch as a service to the territory. The bounty on the Varnes brothers' heads, totaling $1,500, will be paid to you. That money will go toward your restitution payments. Cross looked like he might explode. Your Honor, is there a legal reason Mr. Crowe shouldn't receive the bounty, Mr. Cross? He did kill the Varnes brothers. They were wanted men. The bounty is legitimate. Cross had no answer to that, and his silence was admission enough. Blackwood brought down his gavel. This hearing is concluded. Mr. Crowe, you are free to go under the terms of your probation. Deputy Carson, see that he understands his obligations. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down again, final and decisive, and suddenly people were moving, talking, some cheering, some protesting. Elias stood frozen, unable to quite believe what had just happened. Free! He was free! Carson was grinning, actually grinning, as he removed Elias's manacles. I told you Blackwood was fair. He saw what I saw. A man trying to do right by his wrongs. Dr. Morrison appeared, clapping Elias on the shoulder with uncharacteristic warmth. Well done, my boy. Well done indeed. Then Catherine Patterson was there, hugging him fiercely despite his protests about his wound. Thomas shook his hand with a grip that said more than words ever could. Hutchins appeared, his weathered face split in a rare smile. And finally, Sarah Bennett pushed through the crowd, with Mrs. Hutchins guiding her forward. The little girl looked up at Elias with those two old eyes that had seen too much. You're not going away? She asked, her voice small and uncertain. Elias knelt down, bringing himself to her level despite the protest from his healing wound. No, I'm not going away. I have to stay in the territory, help people, make things right. But I'll be around. I promise. Good. She threw her arms around his neck, hugging him with the fierce desperation of someone who'd already lost too much. I need you to keep trying. Like you said, we both need to keep trying. Elias held her carefully. This small person who'd somehow become the measure of whether his redemption meant anything, and felt something break open in his chest. It wasn't forgiveness. That would have to come from the people he'd wronged, if it came at all. It wasn't absolution. His crimes remained real, their impact permanent. It was something smaller and more fragile. It was hope that maybe, just maybe, the good days could start to outnumber the bad ones. When Sarah finally pulled back, Elias stood to find Mrs. Thornton making her way toward him through the crowd. The old woman moved slowly, leaning heavily on her cane, her face unreadable. She stopped in front of him, and for a long moment they just looked at each other, the survivor and the man who'd been there when her world ended. I lost my husband at Devil's Throat, she said quietly. Lost friends who were like family, and for 8 years I've wanted someone to pay for that. Someone to hurt like I've hurt. Elias braced himself for her condemnation, for the righteous anger he deserved. But you're right, she continued. The men who killed them are dead now. You made sure of that. And I can see in your eyes that you've been paying for Devil's Throat every day since it happened. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that has to be enough, because nothing else will bring them back. She reached out with a trembling hand and touched his arm briefly. I won't say I forgive you. I don't know if I can, but I won't carry hate for you either. That's the best I can offer. It's more than I deserve, Elias said, his voice rough. Thank you. She nodded and turned away, disappearing into the crowd. Elias watched her go, feeling the weight of her words settle into the space where his guilt lived. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was release from the obligation to be hated, and that counted for something. Carson appeared at his elbow. Come on, we need to process your release paperwork, and then you're free to go wherever you want. Within the territory, anyway. They spent the next hour in Marshal Brennan's office, going over the terms of probation, signing documents, establishing the framework for Elias's new life. He would return to Broken Ridge, would continue working for Hutchins at the trading post, would meet monthly with Carson to report on his activities and progress on restitution payments. It was structure. It was accountability. It was exactly what he needed. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Elias walked out of the courthouse a free man for the first time in 8 years. Not free from his past, but free from the need to hide from it. The difference felt monumental. Hutchins had arranged rooms at the boarding house for all of them, and they gathered that evening for a quiet dinner that felt almost celebratory. The Pattersons were heading home in the morning, eager to return to their children. Dr. Morrison would accompany them, his work here complete. Carson would stay in Silver Creek for a few more days, finishing paperwork, before returning to his regular duties. And Elias would ride back to Broken Ridge, to the small room above the trading post, to the work of rebuilding a life from the ruins of his past. As they ate and talked, sharing stories and making plans, Elias felt something he hadn't felt in longer than he could remember. He felt like he belonged somewhere, like he had people who cared whether he lived or died, like his future held more than just running and hiding. Later, standing on the boarding house porch while the others settled in for the night, Elias looked out at Silver Creek's quiet streets and thought about the strange journey that had brought him here. From Devil's Throat to Broken Ridge, from outlaw to protector, from guilty to accountable. The past couldn't be erased. The people he'd wronged couldn't be unharmed. The settlers at Devil's Throat couldn't be brought back to life. But the future wasn't written yet, and for the first time in 8 years, Elias Crowe felt like he had the right to help write it. Tomorrow, the work of redemption would continue. Tomorrow, he'd start making restitution payments, serving his community service, proving that Judge Blackwood's faith in him hadn't been misplaced. But tonight, he could rest. Tonight, he was free. The ride back to Broken Ridge took 2 days, and with each mile, Elias felt the weight of the last weeks beginning to shift into something he could carry. Carson rode alongside him for the first day before branching off toward the territorial marshal's office with a firm handshake and a reminder about their first monthly meeting. Dr. Morrison had departed with the Pattersons at dawn, leaving Elias to travel the final stretch alone with his thoughts and the vast sky overhead. When Broken Ridge finally came into view on the afternoon of the second day, it looked different somehow. Smaller, maybe, or just more real. This wasn't a place to hide anymore. It was home, with all the responsibility and vulnerability that word carried. Word of the trial's outcome had traveled faster than Elias's horse. By the time he rode down the main street, people were stopping to watch, some nodding and greeting, others whispering behind their hands. Marshal Hendricks stood outside his office, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. When Elias passed, the marshal gave a curt nod that might have been respect, or might have been acknowledgement that the world had changed in ways he didn't fully understand. Hutchins was waiting at the trading post, sitting on the porch with 2 cups of coffee going cold in the afternoon heat. He stood when he saw Elias, and his weathered face broke into something approaching a smile. "Figured you'd be back around now," Hutchins said, handing over one of the cups. "Mrs. Hutchins has been cooking all morning. Says a man who's been through what you've been through needs a proper meal." She's not wrong. Elias dismounted, feeling the stiffness in his legs from 2 days of riding. His wound ached, but it was a manageable pain, the kind that reminded you that you were healing rather than breaking. "Where's Sarah?" "School." "Yes, school. We enrolled her last week. Figured she needed something normal, something to help her be a kid again." Hutchins' expression grew serious. "She asks about you every day, sometimes multiple times a day. You've become important to her, Elias. I hope you understand what that means." "I do." And he did. It meant responsibility. It meant showing up. It meant being the kind of man a little girl could look up to, could believe in, could use as evidence that people could change and grow and become better than their worst moments. Good, because that girl's been through hell, and she needs someone who understands that kind of darkness but chose light anyway. Hutchins gestured to the trading post. "Your room's still yours. Your job's still yours if you want it, though I suspect you're going to be busier than just stocking shelves." "The community service?" "That, and word's gotten around about what happened in Silver Creek. Some folks are calling you a hero. Others are calling you a killer who got lucky with a soft judge. But either way, people are paying attention. What you do next matters." Elias knew he was right. Judge Blackwood had given him a chance, but it was just that, a chance. What he built with it would determine whether the faith placed in him had been justified or misguided. The school let out an hour later, and Elias was inside the trading post inventory when he heard the door burst open and small feet running across the wooden floor. Sarah appeared in the doorway to the back room, her face flushed from running, her eyes bright with something that looked like joy. "You came back. Mrs. Hutchins said you would, but I was afraid you wouldn't. That maybe something happened, that maybe I came back, Elias said gently, kneeling down to her level. I promised I would. Remember? She nodded, suddenly shy, her hands twisting in the hem of her dress. How was the trial? Was it scary? It was honest. I told the truth about everything I'd done, good and bad, and the judge decided I deserved a second chance. Everyone deserves a second chance, Sarah said with the absolute certainty of childhood. That's what Mrs. Hutchins says. She says people make mistakes, but that doesn't mean they can't do better. Mrs. Hutchins is a wise woman. She is, and she makes really good pie. Sarah stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Are you going to stay now, for real? Not just for a little while. Elias thought about his probation terms, about the 5 years he was bound to this territory, about the restitution payments that would take even longer to complete. But more than that, he thought about this little girl who'd lost everything and somehow still had the courage to hope. For real, he said. I'm not going anywhere, Sarah. You're stuck with me. She smiled then, a real smile, the first he'd seen from her that reached all the way to her eyes. Then she hugged him quickly and ran off, calling something about telling Mrs. Hutchins the good news. Hutchins appeared in the doorway she'd vacated, shaking his head with amusement. That girl's got more energy than 3 grown men. How she survived what she did and still has that kind of spirit, I'll never understand. Look, kids are tougher than we give them credit for, Elias said, standing slowly. They bend instead of breaking. We're the ones who get brittle with age. Philosophical today, aren't we? Just honest. I've had a lot of time to think lately. Over the next weeks, Elias settled into a routine that felt almost normal. He worked at the trading post during the days, learning the business more thoroughly than before, helping Hutchins with inventory and orders and the 1,000 small tasks that kept the operation running. In the evenings, he began his community service, which Marshal Brennan had arranged to include everything from repairing the town's wells to helping rebuild a barn that had burned down the previous winter. The physical work was hard, especially with his healing wound, but it was also satisfying in a way he hadn't expected. There was something clean about fixing things, about making tangible improvements to people's lives. It felt like the opposite of his time with the Varnes gang, when every action had been about taking or destroying. His first restitution payment went to William Hayes, the rancher who'd testified at the hearing. Elias rode out to Hayes's spread with $50, a quarter of the bounty money, and found the older man working on his fence line. Hayes straightened when he saw Elias approaching, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle leaning against a post. But he didn't reach for it, just watched with wary eyes as Elias dismounted. Mr. Hayes, Elias said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. I wanted to deliver this personally. Hayes took the envelope, opened it, and stared at the money inside. What's this? Restitution. For what the Varnes gang took from you 8 years ago? It's not everything, but it's a start. I'll make payments every month until the debt is satisfied. Hayes was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands holding the envelope like it might disappear. You didn't have to do this. The judge didn't specify amounts or timelines. No, he didn't. But you lost cattle and horses because of me. That's a debt I owe, and I'm going to pay it. Elias met the older man's eyes. I know money doesn't undo what happened. I know it doesn't erase the fear your family felt that day. But it's all I have to give, and I'm giving it. Hayes studied him for a long time, then slowly extended his hand. You're all right, Crowe. Not many men would do what you're doing, facing up to their past instead of running from it. They shook hands, and something passed between them that was more than forgiveness, but less than friendship. It was acknowledgement. It was the first real step toward making things right. As autumn deepened toward winter, Elias's life in Broken Ridge began to take on a shape that felt permanent. He continued his work at the trading post, continued his community service, continued making restitution payments to the victims of his crimes. Each month, Deputy Carson arrived for their meeting, and each month, Elias could see the deputy's initial skepticism transforming into something like approval. You're doing good work here, Carson said during their third meeting, reviewing Elias's reports of his activities. Better than most men on probation. Most of them are just counting days until they're free. You seem to be actually building something. I am, Elias confirmed. We're trying to, anyway. It shows. Judge Blackwood asked about you last week. I told him you were exceeding expectations. I'm just doing what I should have been doing all along, living honestly, helping where I can, facing my responsibilities. Carson closed his notebook, his expression thoughtful. You know, when I first arrested you, or when you first surrendered, rather, I wasn't sure what to think. Part of me saw an outlaw trying to escape justice. But the longer I watch you, the more I see something else.
What's that? A man who's figured out that redemption isn't about grand gestures or dramatic moments. It's about showing up every day and doing the work, even when nobody's watching, especially when nobody's watching. Those words stayed with Elias long after Carson rode out of town. They became a kind of compass, pointing him toward the man he was trying to become, rather than dwelling on the man he'd been. Sarah remained a constant presence in his life. She'd started visiting the trading post after school, doing homework at the counter while Elias worked, chattering about her day and asking questions about everything from arithmetic to why the sky changed colors at sunset. Hutchins and his wife had officially taken her in, starting the process of formal adoption, but Sarah had made it clear that Elias was also part of her new family, whether he liked it or not. You're like... She paused one afternoon, searching for the right words. Like an uncle, but not a regular uncle, a special one who understands the bad things. The bad things? The scary thoughts, the nightmares, the way sometimes everything feels heavy and sad for no reason. Her young voice held an old understanding. Mrs. Hutchins tries to understand, and she's really nice about it. But you actually know. You've been there. Elias put down the crate he was lifting and sat beside her on the counter. I have. And I still go there sometimes, in my head. Still wake up at night thinking about things I can't change. Does it get better? Yes. Slowly. Some days are harder than others, but the good days start to outnumber the bad ones. Just like I told you. Are we having a good day today? Elias looked around the trading post, at the afternoon light slanting through windows, at Hutchins humming tunelessly while organizing the dry goods, at Sarah's homework spread across the counter, at the simple normality of it all. Yeah, he said, today's a good day. Winter arrived with the kind of cold that turned breath to fog and made every movement a negotiation with frozen joints. Elias's wound had healed to a pink scar that ached when storms were coming, but otherwise gave him little trouble. He'd completed his first 100 hours of community service and started on the second 100, this time helping to build a new schoolhouse that the town had been planning for years. It was during the construction of the schoolhouse that the last remnant of his past came looking for him. Elias was on the roof, hammering shingles into place, when he heard the commotion from the street. Raised voices, the sound of a horse being ridden too hard. Marshal Hendricks shouting for someone to stop. He looked up to see a rider barreling down the main street, firing wildly into the air, scattering people like startled chickens. Even from a distance, Elias recognized the man. Jack Porter, one of the hired guns who'd ridden with the Varnes gang. Younger than Reeves, meaner than most, and apparently not smart enough to know when to let the past stay buried. Porter reined in his horse in front of the trading post, still firing his gun, still shouting, Elias Crowe! Get out here, you backstabbing son of a bitch! You killed the Varnes brothers! You destroyed the only family I had! Elias climbed down from the roof, his mind already calculating angles and outcomes. He wasn't armed. His probation terms required him to keep his weapons locked up except when explicitly needed, but the trading post was only 50 yards away. He could make it there, get his rifle, end this the way he'd ended the confrontation at Patterson's ranch. But then he saw Sarah emerging from the trading post, drawn by the shouting, her small face curious and unafraid because she didn't yet understand that danger had arrived. Everything crystallized in that moment. This wasn't Patterson's ranch. This wasn't a battle in the wilderness where violence was the only language spoken. This was Broken Ridge, his home now, and there were better ways to handle threats than with bullets. Sarah, get back inside, he shouted, breaking into a run. Porter saw her at the same moment, and something ugly crossed his face, the realization that he could hurt Elias in ways worse than death. His gun swung toward the little girl. Elias ran faster than he'd ever run, his healing wound screaming protest, his heart hammering against his ribs. He wasn't going to make it. Porter's finger was tightening on the trigger, Sarah was frozen in the doorway, and Elias wasn't going to make it.
Then Marshal Hendricks appeared from the side, tackling Porter off his horse. The two men went down in a tangle of limbs and cursing, Porter's gun firing wildly into the air. Elias reached Sarah and swept her back into the trading post, shielding her with his body, while outside the struggle continued. More men arrived, townspeople who'd grown tired of outlaws and violence, who'd decided their town was worth defending. They pulled Porter off Hendricks, disarmed him, pinned him to the ground while he screamed threats and obscenities. When Elias finally emerged, his hands shaking with the aftermath of fear, Hendricks was standing over Porter with his gun drawn and an expression of pure disgust on his face. "You came into my town," Hendricks said, his voice deadly quiet. "You endangered innocent people, and you threatened a child. I don't care what grievance you think you have. That ends now." "That man killed the Varnes brothers," Porter spat. "He's a traitor and a murderer." "That man saved lives and faced justice for his crimes. You're just another outlaw too stupid to know when the game is over." Hendricks looked at the gathered crowd. "Anyone object to me locking this fool up and sending for Deputy Carson?" Nobody objected. In fact, several people voiced enthusiastic approval. As Porter was dragged toward the marshal's office, still struggling and cursing, Hutchins appeared beside Elias. "You didn't go for your gun." "No. Even though you could have. Even though it would have been self-defense. I'm trying to be different than I was. Different than the Varnes gang. Violence can't be my first answer anymore." Hutchins nodded slowly. "That's growth, son. Real growth." Inside the trading post, Sarah sat trembling on a chair, her homework forgotten, her eyes wide with the fear that had finally caught up to her. Elias knelt beside her, taking her small hands in his larger ones. "Are you okay?" "He was going to shoot me," she whispered. "Like they shot my family." "But he didn't. Marshal Hendricks stopped him. The town stopped him. Because we protect each other here. Because we've decided that violence doesn't get the last word anymore." "But what if he comes back? What if there are more like him?" "Then we'll handle them the same way, together, as a community, with law instead of chaos." Elias squeezed her hands gently. "Sarah, I can't promise you'll never be in danger again. The world's too unpredictable for that. But I can promise that you're not alone, that people here care about you, that we'll fight to keep you safe and not just with guns." She nodded, and some of the fear left her eyes. "Will you stay here tonight? I don't want to be alone. I'll stay as long as you need me to." Deputy Carson arrived 2 days later to collect Porter, who'd spent his confinement in Hendricks's jail, alternating between threats and drunken sobbing. Carson listened to witness statements, documented everything in his careful handwriting, and then pulled Elias aside for a private conversation. "This is the third former Varnes gang member who's come after you," Carson said. "Reeves, that young one who ran away, and now Porter. There could be others." "I know. And you're handling it by not handling it, by letting the law work instead of taking matters into your own hands. That's the point of having law, isn't it? So we don't all have to be our own judges and executioners?" Carson smiled. "You sound like a defense attorney, or a philosopher." He closed his notebook. "For what it's worth, I'm going to recommend to Judge Blackwood that your probation be reduced. You've more than demonstrated your commitment to rehabilitation. I see no reason you shouldn't be granted full freedom within the next year instead of 5. Elias felt something loosen in his chest. "I appreciate that, Deputy, but honestly, I don't mind the probation. It gives me structure, accountability. It reminds me every day of what I'm working toward." "Which is?" "Being someone worth believing in. Being the kind of man Sarah thinks I am." Carson clapped him on the shoulder. "You're already that man, Crowe. You just need to believe it yourself." As winter softened into early spring, Broken Ridge experienced something it hadn't known in years: peace. The Varnes gang was gone, scattered or dead. The few remaining members who might have sought revenge had learned that Elias Crowe wasn't an easy target, and that the town he lived in wouldn't tolerate threats to one of their own. The schoolhouse was completed in March, a sturdy building with real glass windows and a bell that Sarah got to ring on opening day. Elias had contributed more than his required community service hours to the project, working late into evenings and through weekends because it felt important to build something that would outlast him, something that would serve children for generations. At the dedication ceremony, the mayor, A portly man named Williams, who ran the general store, made a speech about community and resilience and the importance of education. Then he did something Elias didn't expect. "We have one more dedication to make today," Williams said, gesturing for Elias to come forward. The schoolhouse was built by many hands, but none worked harder or longer than Elias Crowe, a man who came to our town seeking redemption and found a home instead. A man who proved that our worst mistakes don't have to define our future. He unveiled a small plaque beside the schoolhouse door. It read, "Bennett Crowe School, built by a community that believes in second chances. Dedicated to Sarah Bennett and all children who deserve a future brighter than their past." Elias felt his throat tighten. Beside him, Sarah was crying, but smiling through her tears. She took his hand and squeezed it, and he squeezed back. "Thank you," he managed to say to the assembled crowd. "I don't deserve this honor, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to." "You already have," Hutchins called out from the crowd. "More than you know." The celebration afterward was simple but genuine. Food brought by various families, music from a fiddle player who'd had too much to drink, children running and playing while adults talked and laughed. Elias found himself surrounded by people who'd once been strangers and were now something like friends. Catherine Patterson cornered him near the food table, her husband hovering protectively nearby. "Our youngest just started walking," she said. "I wanted you to know, we named him Elias, after the man who gave him the chance to grow up." Elias didn't know what to say to that. The weight of it, a child carrying his name, a living reminder of the choice he'd made to stand and fight instead of running, was almost too much to bear. "I'm honored," he said finally, "and I promise to do my best to give him a name worth carrying." As the sun set and the celebration began to wind down, Elias found himself standing with Sarah on the schoolhouse steps, looking out at Broken Ridge bathed in golden light. "Do you ever think about them?" Sarah asked quietly. "My family?" "Every day." "Me too. But it doesn't hurt as much as it used to." "Is that okay? Does that mean I'm forgetting them?" "No," Elias said gently. "It means you're healing. And healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to carry the memory without letting it crush you. Your family would want you to live, Sarah. Really live, not just survive." "I know, and I am living. I have school now, and friends, and the Hutchins, and you. I have a whole new family." She paused. "Is it okay to have a new family when your old one is gone?" "It's more than okay. It's what people who love you would want. Your parents, your brothers. They'd want you to be happy, to be safe, to have people who care about you. That's not betraying their memory. That's honoring it." Sarah leaned against him, and they sat in comfortable silence while the last light faded from the sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and another answered. The sound was lonely, but also familiar, part of the landscape they'd both learned to call home. The weeks that followed brought a rhythm to life that Elias had never experienced. The simple, unremarkable pattern of days spent in honest work, evenings spent with people who knew his whole story and valued him anyway, nights spent sleeping without constantly checking over his shoulder. His final restitution payment was made in late April to a widow whose husband had died during a stagecoach robbery the Varnes gang had committed. She accepted the money with quiet dignity and told him she could see he was trying, and that was enough. Carson's recommendation to Judge Blackwood was approved in May. Elias's probation was officially reduced to 1 year, with strong indications it would be terminated early if his exemplary behavior continued. The news should have felt like liberation, but instead it felt like responsibility, proof that people believed in him, that they trusted him to continue choosing the right path even without legal obligation. It was early June when the circuit judge arrived in Broken Ridge for his quarterly visit, bringing news from the wider territory. Over dinner at the boarding house, he mentioned something that caught Elias's attention. "There's been talk in Silver Creek about establishing a territorial ranger service," the judge said between bites of beef stew. "Men who'd patrol the remote areas, keep the peace where marshals can't reach. They're looking for people with experience, people who understand both sides of the law." Elias felt something stir in his chest. Both sides? Men who've seen darkness but chose light. Men who could talk to outlaws in their own language but serve justice instead of chaos. The territorial governor thinks such men could be effective in ways traditional law enforcement can't. After dinner, Elias found Carson, who'd arrived that afternoon for their monthly meeting, sitting on the boarding house porch. "You heard about the ranger service?" Carson asked without preamble. "I did." "You'd be good at it. Better than good. You'd be perfect. You know how outlaws think, how they operate. You know the territory, and you've proven you can be trusted." "I'm still on probation, which could be terminated tomorrow if I recommend it and Blackwood approves, which we both would, if you wanted to pursue this." Elias was quiet for a long moment, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "What about Broken Ridge? What about Sarah and the Hutchins and the life I've built here?" "Rangers aren't assigned to one place. You'd have a territory to patrol, but your home base could be Broken Ridge. You'd be gone sometimes, but you'd always come back." Carson leaned forward. "Look, Crowe, you've done amazing work here. You've rebuilt your life, made amends, become a valued member of the community. But I've watched you, and I see someone who still has more to give. The territory needs good men willing to stand between civilization and chaos. You've proven you can be that man. Let me think about it. Take your time. The program doesn't start for another month." "But Elias, consider it seriously. You could help a lot of people." The next morning, Elias rode out to the Bennett Ranch, or what remained of it. The burned house was long gone, but the land was still there, waiting. He stood where the family had died, where Sarah had hidden in the root cellar, where his decision to pursue the Varnes gang had begun. "I don't know what to do," he said to the empty air, to the ghosts that might or might not be listening. "I've built something here, something good, but there's a chance to do more, to help prevent other families from ending up like you. I just don't know if I'm the right person for it." The wind whispered through the grass, carrying no answers. He was heading back to town when he saw Sarah walking along the road, her school books tucked under her arm. She waved when she spotted him, and he rode over to meet her. "You went to the ranch," she said. It wasn't a question. "How'd you know?" "You get a certain look when you're thinking about big things, and you were gone this morning, which usually means you went somewhere important." She squinted up at him. "What big thing are you thinking about?" He told her about the ranger service, about the opportunity and the uncertainty. She listened with the serious attention of someone older than her years. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Are you afraid of leaving?" "A little. Because of me? Because of everyone here. Because I've finally found a place I belong, and I'm scared of losing it." Sarah smiled, that same smile that had broken through tears on the day of his trial. "You can't lose it, Elias. Home isn't a place you stay. It's a place you can always come back to. The Hutchins taught me that. And if you can help other people, other families like mine, then you should do it. Because that's who you are now. You're someone who helps." Out of the mouths of children, Elias thought, comes wisdom that adults spend years trying to find. "You're pretty smart for an 8-year-old. Almost 9 now, and yes, I am pretty smart." She grinned. "So are you going to do it?" "I think I am." "Good. Just promise you'll come back and visit, and write letters. I'm getting really good at reading." "I promise." He gave his answer to Carson that evening, and the wheels were set in motion. Judge Blackwood approved the early termination of his probation with a personal letter commending his rehabilitation and service to the community. The territorial governor's office sent official appointment papers, and within 3 weeks, Elias Crowe was officially sworn in as one of the first territorial rangers, with a badge that carried the weight of both law and trust. His territory covered the region from Broken Ridge to Silver Creek and beyond, hundreds of square miles of wilderness, ranches, small towns, and the kind of remote areas where law struggled to reach. He would patrol, investigate, mediate disputes, and when necessary, bring justice to those who threatened the peace. The night before his first patrol, Broken Ridge threw him a send-off at the saloon. It was a modest affair. The town wasn't rich, and most people had to work early the next morning, but it was genuine. Hutchins gave a speech about second chances and the importance of good men standing up. Marshal Hendricks, in a rare moment of warmth, admitted that he'd been wrong about Elias and was proud to call him a colleague. Even some of the people Elias had made restitution payments to showed up, offering handshakes and words of encouragement. Sarah presented him with a gift, a journal, bound in leather, with his initials carved into the cover. "For your adventures," she said, "so you can write them down and tell me about them when you come back." I will, he promised. Every single one. As the party wound down and people drifted home, Elias found himself standing outside the saloon with Hutchins, both men looking up at the stars. "You're doing the right thing," Hutchins said. "Broken Ridge will miss you, but the territory needs you more. I'll be back regularly. This is still home." "I know. And we'll be here." Hutchins pulled out a silver pocket watch, worn smooth with age. "This was my father's. Carried it through the war, through everything after. I want you to have it." "Hutchins, I can't." "You can, and you will. Consider it a reminder that time moves forward, always. That we can't change the past, but we can choose how we spend our future. You've chosen well, Elias. Make the most of it." Elias left at dawn, his saddlebags packed with supplies, his ranger badge pinned to his chest, his father's rifle, returned to him with his official appointment, secure in its scabbard. The town was quiet, most people still sleeping, but Sarah stood on the trading post porch with the Hutchins, waving as he rode past. He waved back, committing the image to memory. The little girl who'd survived everything the world could throw at her, standing in the morning light, surrounded by people who loved her, safe and whole, and looking toward a future that held promise instead of just pain. The territory stretched out before him, vast and challenging and full of people who needed help. Some would be good people in bad situations. Some would be bad people making worse choices. All of them would be his responsibility, his chance to make a difference, to prove that Judge Blackwood's faith in him hadn't been misplaced. As Broken Ridge disappeared behind him and the open trail beckoned ahead, Elias thought about the journey that had brought him here. From outlaw to fugitive, from fugitive to protector, from protector to ranger. It wasn't the path he'd have chosen 8 years ago, bleeding in the desert after Devil's Throat, but it was the path that had chosen him, and he'd walked it as honestly as he could. The past would always be there, a shadow that followed him no matter how far he rode or how much good he did. He'd never be free of Devil's Throat, never be able to undo the crimes he'd committed or the people he'd hurt, but he could carry that weight forward, could use it as fuel to be better, to help more, to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. His first assignment took him to a mining camp 3 days' ride north, where tensions between workers and management had escalated to the edge of violence. He arrived to find both sides armed and angry, ready to settle their dispute with bullets instead of words. But he also found families caught in the middle, children who'd done nothing wrong, women who just wanted their husbands to come home safe, men who were tired of fighting and just wanted fair pay for dangerous work. He spent a week there, talking to both sides, mediating, finding common ground that neither side had thought to look for. When he left, a tentative peace had been established, an agreement reached that wasn't perfect but was better than bloodshed. It wasn't the dramatic showdown the miners had wanted or the crushing victory the management had expected. It was compromise, negotiation, the unglamorous work of preventing violence rather than responding to it. It was everything Elias had become. Over the following months, he patrolled his territory with diligence and growing confidence. He broke up rustling operations, mediated water rights disputes, tracked down fugitives, and helped lost travelers find their way. Some situations required his gun. Most required his words, his patience, his ability to see past anger to the legitimate grievances underneath. And every month he returned to Broken Ridge for a few days, to check on Sarah and the Hutchins, to help at the trading post, to remind himself why he was doing this work. Sarah's letters followed him across the territory. Childish scrawlings at first, then increasingly sophisticated descriptions of her life, her growth, her healing. One letter in particular stood out, arriving in late autumn. "Dear Elias, Mrs. Hutchins says I should tell you about my nightmares, since you understand them. They're getting less frequent. Sometimes I go whole weeks without dreaming about that day. And when I do dream about it, I also dream about you arriving afterward, about how you made the bad men face justice. I used to think about my family every day and feel only sadness. Now I think about them and feel grateful I had them, even for a short time. I think that's healing, like you said. The good days are starting to outnumber the bad ones. I hope your good days are outnumbering your bad ones, too. Come home soon. We miss you. Love, Sarah." Elias read that letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and placed it in the journal Sarah had given him, alongside his notes and observations from his patrols. She was healing. And maybe, slowly, so was he. Winter came again, completing the cycle of seasons, marking a full year since Sarah had stumbled into Broken Ridge and changed everything. Elias requested leave to be in town for the anniversary, knowing she'd need support on that day. He arrived to find her standing at the rebuilt Bennett Ranch, not the ruin it had been, but a new structure that Thomas Patterson and a crew of volunteers had constructed. It wasn't charity, Hutchins explained. The land belonged to Sarah now, held in trust until she came of age, and the community had decided she deserved better than a memorial to tragedy. "We can't give her back what was taken," Hutchins said as they watched Sarah explore the new barn with wide eyes. "But we can give her a future. When she's old enough, she can decide what to do with this place. Farm it, sell it, turn it into something completely new. But it'll be hers, and it'll be whole." Sarah ran back to them, her face flushed with excitement. "Elias, did you see? They built it exactly like I remembered, but better." The Hutchins said, "When I'm grown, I can live here if I want, or I can do something else with it. It's mine." "What do you think you'll do with it?" Elias asked. She thought for a moment, her young face serious. I think I want it to be a place where people can stay when they need help, like you helped me, like the town helped you. A place where people who've lost things can come and remember what it feels like to be safe." Elias felt his throat tighten. This child, who'd lost everything, wanted to turn her inheritance into a sanctuary for others. It was the most beautiful form of redemption he could imagine. "That's a wonderful idea, Sarah. Will you help me when I'm old enough to start it? Will you be there?" "I will. I promise." That evening, the town gathered at the new schoolhouse for a memorial service. Not a funeral, those had been held a year ago, but a remembrance. People spoke about the Bennett family, about their kindness and dreams. They lit candles for each family member. And at Sarah's request, they also lit candles for the Varnes brothers and all the others who'd died in the cycle of violence that had consumed so many lives. "They were bad people," Sarah said when some protested honoring the outlaws. "But they were still people. And maybe if someone had helped them before they became bad, all of this could have been different. So we remember them too, and we promise to do better." Elias stood in the back of the schoolhouse, watching this little girl teach a room full of adults about mercy and complexity, and the importance of seeing humanity even in those who'd lost their own. He thought about Marcus and Garrett and Cole Varnes, about the boys they might have been before poverty and anger and bad choices had shaped them into monsters. He thought about his own path, about how easily he could have become them if not for the horror of Devil's Throat shocking him into awareness. After the service, as people drifted into the night, Deputy Carson pulled Elias aside. "The territorial governor wants to expand the ranger program," Carson said. "They're looking for someone to head up training for new recruits. Someone who understands both the law and the lawless, who can teach others how to walk that line." "And you're suggesting me?" "I'm more than suggesting. I'm recommending. You've proven yourself, Crowe. Not just as a ranger, but as someone who understands redemption from the inside out. These new rangers, they need to learn more than how to shoot straight and track fugitives. They need to learn what you've learned, that justice isn't just about punishment, it's about preventing the next tragedy." Elias looked out at Broken Ridge, at the life he'd built here, at Sarah talking animatedly with other children her age. "I'd have to move to Silver Creek. Mostly, but you'd still patrol, still have field work, and Broken Ridge is only 2 days away. You'd visit regularly." Carson's expression grew serious. "Look, I know you're comfortable here, but comfort isn't growth, and the territory needs what you can teach. Let me think about it." He spent the next weeks weighing the decision. Moving to Silver Creek meant leaving the daily rhythms of Broken Ridge, the easy familiarity of the trading post, the constant presence in Sarah's life. But it also meant reaching more people, teaching others to be the kind of lawmen the territory needed, multiplying his impact beyond what he could achieve alone. In the end, it was Sarah who made the decision clear. "You're worried about leaving me," she said one afternoon when he was visiting. They were sitting by the creek that ran behind the Hutchins property, watching the water flow past. "I am," he admitted. "You've been through so much. I don't want you to feel abandoned." "I won't. Because you taught me something important, Elias. You taught me that people you love don't have to be with you all the time for them to matter. They can be far away doing important work, and they're still yours, still family. She picked up a smooth stone, turning it over in her hands. My first family is gone, but I have a second family now. The Hutchins, the town, you. And families support each other in doing good things, even when it's hard. When did you get so wise? I had a good teacher. She threw the stone into the creek, watching it splash. Go to Silver Creek, teach other rangers, help more people. I'll be here when you visit, and I'll write letters, and we'll still be family. That doesn't change. So Elias accepted the position. He moved to Silver Creek in early spring, taking a small house near the ranger headquarters, beginning the work of developing a training program that would teach new recruits not just tactics and law, but ethics and judgment and the importance of seeing people rather than just criminals. His first class of recruits was a mixed group, former soldiers, ranch hands, a couple of reformed outlaws not unlike himself. He taught them tracking, shooting, legal procedures. But he also taught them about listening, about finding peaceful solutions, about understanding that every person they encountered was someone's son or daughter, husband or wife, and deserved to be treated with dignity even when being arrested. The gun is your last resort, he told them during one session. Your first tools should be your words, your patience, your ability to see the person behind the problem. Sometimes you'll still need the gun, but if that's where you start instead of where you end, you're not a ranger. You're just another outlaw with a badge. He used his own story as a teaching tool, sharing how he'd gone from gang member to ranger, what he'd learned about redemption and accountability. Some recruits were inspired, some were skeptical. All of them left his program better prepared for the moral complexities they'd face in the field. Years passed in this new rhythm. Elias trained rangers, patrolled when needed, visited Broken Ridge regularly, and watched Sarah grow from a traumatized child into a capable young woman. She finished school with top marks, started working with the Hutchins at the trading post, and began planning in earnest for her sanctuary ranch. On her 16th birthday, Elias gave her a gift, the deed to an adjacent property that had come up for sale, purchased with savings from his ranger salary and what remained of the Varn's bounty money. Now you have enough land for your sanctuary, Shabas, he said, as she stared at the document with tears streaming down her face. When you're ready to build it, I'll help. You've already helped, she said, hugging him fiercely. More than you know, more than I can ever repay.
You don't repay family, Sarah. You just love them and let them love you back. The sanctuary opened 2 years later, on the anniversary of the Bennett massacre. It was a simple operation at first. A main house where Sarah lived, a few outbuildings for guests, space for people who needed temporary shelter while they rebuilt their lives. But it grew steadily, supported by donations and volunteer labor, becoming exactly what Sarah had envisioned, a place of healing and second chances. Elias helped when he could, between his training responsibilities and field work. He built fences, repaired roofs, and occasionally counseled guests who were struggling with their own demons. Some of them recognized him, knew his story. Most didn't care about his past. They were too focused on their own. It was during one of these visits, while repairing a window frame on a warm summer afternoon, that Catherine Patterson arrived with news. Thomas passed last night, she said, her voice steady despite the grief in her eyes. Peaceful in his sleep. He was 63. Elias set down his tools. I'm so sorry, Catherine. Don't be. He lived a good life, a full life. You gave him that. You gave all of us that. When you stopped the Varn's gang. She pulled out an envelope. He wanted you to have this. Made me promise to deliver it personally. Inside was a letter, written in Thomas Patterson's careful hand. Elias, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't mourn too much. I've had more years than I expected, thanks to you. I wanted to write this while I still could, to tell you something important. You saved my life, yes. But more than that, you showed me what real courage looks like. Not the courage to fight, but the courage to face your mistakes, to admit wrong, to do better. I've watched you over these years, seen how you've dedicated yourself to helping others, to preventing the kind of violence that almost destroyed my family. You think you're still paying a debt, still atoning for your past. But from where I'm sitting, you've long since balanced those scales. You're a good man, Elias Crowe. Not because you never made mistakes, but because you learned from them. I hope someday you can see yourself the way the rest of us see you, as someone worthy of the second chance you were given. Thank you for my life and my family's lives,
and for showing all of us what redemption actually looks like. Your friend, Thomas Patterson. Elias read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and added it to his journal alongside Sarah's letters and his own notes from years of ranger work. Thomas was right, he realized. He'd been carrying his guilt for so long that he'd forgotten to notice when the balance had shifted, when the good he'd done had begun to outweigh the harm. He wasn't the same man who'd ridden with the Varnes gang. He wasn't even the same man who'd killed them at the Patterson Ranch. He'd changed, grown, become someone new while still acknowledging who he'd been. That night, at Thomas Patterson's wake, Elias stood and shared a memory. Thomas once told me that the measure of a man isn't his worst day, but what he does with all the days after. He lived that truth, and he taught it to me. He showed me that second chances aren't just given, they're earned day by day, choice by choice, action by action. He raised his glass to Thomas Patterson, who saw the good in a broken man and helped him become whole. The wake became a celebration of a life well lived, full of stories and laughter, and the kind of comfortable grief that comes when someone dies having completed their journey. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Elias realized he was happy. Not the desperate, clutching happiness of someone afraid it will slip away, but the deep, settled contentment of someone who'd found their place in the world and knew it was real. More years passed. Elias continued training rangers, watching his students go out into the territory and make it safer, more just, more humane. He continued visiting Broken Ridge, watching Sarah's sanctuary grow and flourish. He continued working on himself, on being better, on honoring the faith that people like Judge Blackwood and Thomas Patterson and Sarah Bennett had placed in him. He was 63, the same age Thomas had been, when he decided it was time to retire from active duty. His body was slower than it used to be, marked by old wounds and hard years, but his mind was clear, and his purpose was unwavering. The territorial governor held a ceremony in Silver Creek to honor his service. The hall was packed with rangers he'd trained, criminals he'd brought to justice, and people whose lives he'd touched over the decades. Sarah was there, now a woman of 31, running one of the most successful rehabilitation programs in the territory. Carson was there, retired himself now, but still sharp as ever. Even a few of the people he'd made restitution payments to attended, including William Hayes, now in his 90s but still strong enough to make the journey. The governor presented Elias with a medal for distinguished service, gave a speech about courage and redemption, and then invited others to share their memories. Person after person stood. Rangers who'd learned from him, families he'd helped, communities he'd protected. They told stories of his wisdom, his compassion, his unwavering commitment to justice tempered with mercy. And through it all, Elias sat quietly, overwhelmed by the weight of evidence that his life had mattered, that the choices he'd made after Devil's Throat had created ripples of good that extended far beyond anything he'd imagined. When it was finally over, when the crowd had dispersed and only Sarah remained, she sat beside him in the empty hall. "How does it feel?" she asked, "to have given everything, to have made such a difference?" Elias thought about it, really thought about it. He thought about the boy he'd been, looking for belonging in the wrong places, about the young man fleeing Devil's Throat, convinced he was damned, about the drifter in Broken Ridge, trying to disappear, about all the versions of himself he'd been and shed like old skins. "It feels like coming home," he said finally. "Not to a place, but to myself, to who I was always supposed to be if I hadn't gotten lost along the way." "You weren't lost," Sarah said. "You were just taking the long way around." They sat together in comfortable silence, two people who'd survived the worst and built something beautiful from the ruins. Outside, the sun was setting over Silver Creek, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Elias pulled out his journal, the one Sarah had given him so many years ago, now filled with decades of entries. He opened to a blank page near the end and wrote, "Today I was honored for a lifetime of service, but the real honor came years ago, in a courtroom where Judge Blackwood gave me a second chance, in a trading post where Hutchins gave me work, in a small girl's eyes when she chose to believe in me despite having every reason not to. I've spent 30 years trying to balance scales that could never truly be balanced. The settlers at Devil's Throat are still dead. The families the Varnes gang terrorized still carry those scars. My crimes remain real, their impact permanent, but I've learned that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about honoring it by becoming better, by preventing future tragedies, by standing between the innocent and those who would harm them. It's about showing up every day and doing the work, especially when it's hard, especially when you don't think you deserve the chance. I don't know if I'm a good man, but I'm a better man than I was, and I'll keep trying to be better still. That's all any of us can do. That's all any of us should do. The ghost who walked back into the frontier has finally found peace, not by running from his past, but by facing it, accepting it, and choosing to be something more. This is my legacy, not the violence I once participated in, but the violence I prevented, the lives I protected, the people I helped become their better selves. And maybe in the end, that's enough. Maybe I'm enough. He closed the journal and looked at Sarah, this woman who'd grown from a traumatized child into someone who healed others, who'd transformed her tragedy into a sanctuary. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. For showing me that the past doesn't have to define the future. For being my family." Sarah smiled, and in that smile was everything they'd survived and everything they'd built. "Thank you for teaching me the same thing. Thank you for coming back when you could have run. Thank you for being who you are." As night fell over Silver Creek and stars emerged in the darkening sky, Elias Crowe sat with the family he'd chosen and who'd chosen him, and knew with absolute certainty that his journey, long, painful, redemptive, had been worth every step. The frontier was changing, slowly becoming civilized, slowly replacing violence with law, chaos with order. And he'd been part of that change, a living example that people could be more than their worst moments, that justice was bigger than punishment, that second chances were worth giving. He was 63 years old, a former outlaw turned ranger, a broken man who'd learned to be whole. And for the first time since Devil's Throat, he was completely, utterly at peace. The ghost had finally come home. And in coming home, he'd found himself.